Close your eyes for just a moment. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of the day begin to slip away, like sand through gentle fingers. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Nile, thousands of years ago. The air is warm, carrying the faint scent of river reeds and sun-baked earth. The water moves slowly beside you, dark and patient, reflecting the first stars of evening. Somewhere in the distance, rising against the fading sky, you see them, the pyramids. Not finished, not yet, still growing, stone by stone, lifted by nothing more than human hands, wooden sledges, and the quiet determination of ordinary people. No cranes, no iron, no wheels to carry the weight, just patience and time, and the slow rhythm of work that stretched across decades. Tonight, we travel back to that time. We walk among the workers. We feel the warmth of the desert wind, and we discover how these monuments rose from the sand, without anything you might expect. No aliens, no lost technology, no impossible secrets. Only the ingenuity of human beings, farmers and craftsmen, bakers and stonecutters, working together beneath the Egyptian sun. So settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let the world outside grow quiet. We're going to spend some time together tonight. You and I, walking through history, listening to the sounds of copper chisels tapping against stone, feeling the cool shade of the workers' village at midday, watching the Nile carry granite from distant quarries, drifting slowly, peacefully, like a dream. The pyramids weren't built by magic. They were built by people who woke each morning, ate their bread and onions, and walked to work beneath the same sun that rises over Egypt today. People with families, with hopes and fears, with aching muscles and calloused hands. And yet, together, they created something that has stood for nearly 5,000 years. Tonight, we honor them, not with grand proclamations, but with quiet attention, with the soft telling of their story. So let go of tomorrow. Let go of yesterday. There is only this moment, and a story that has waited thousands of years to be told again. The desert is quiet now. The workers have gone to rest, but the stones remain, and so does their story. Let it carry you gently into sleep. But before we dive in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a small gesture that truly helps the channel grow, and I'm always curious to know where in the world you're listening from, and at what time of night. Let us begin where all things in ancient Egypt began, with the river, the Nile. Say the word slowly. Let it rest on your tongue. Nile. It sounds like a sigh, doesn't it? Like water slipping over smooth stones. Like the breath of something ancient and patient. Something that has flowed through the heart of Africa for millions of years, long before the first human being ever knelt at its banks to drink. Tonight, we sit beside that river. Not the Nile of today, with its modern dams and cities, but the Nile of 5,000 years ago. A river so central to Egyptian life that the people who lived along its shores did not simply depend on it. They worshipped it. They planned their entire existence around its rhythms. They believed, with quiet certainty, that the river was a gift from the gods themselves. And in many ways, they were right. You see, Egypt is a desert, one of the driest places on earth. If you were to walk just a few miles away from the river in any direction, you would find yourself in a landscape of sand and rock and silence, a place where almost nothing grows, where the sun beats down without mercy, where life struggles to survive. But along the Nile, along that narrow ribbon of water cutting through the emptiness, there you would find paradise. The ancient Egyptians called their country Kemet, which means the Black Land. They were not referring to the desert. They were referring to the soil, the rich, dark, impossibly fertile soil that the Nile deposited along its banks every single year, without fail, for thousands upon thousands of years. This was the miracle of the inundation. Every summer, far to the south in the mountains of Ethiopia, the monsoon rains would fall. Torrents of water would cascade down from the highlands, carrying with them enormous quantities of silt, nutrient-rich sediment washed from volcanic soils, from ancient forests, from highlands that the Egyptians themselves would never see. This water would flow northward, gathering strength, until it reached Egypt. And there, sometime around July, the river would begin to rise, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, The farmers would watch the water creeping higher along the banks, measuring its progress with simple nilometers, stone markers carved into the riverbed that told them how high the flood would reach this year. A good flood meant abundance. It meant the fields would be covered with that precious black silt, ready for planting when the waters receded. It meant full granaries, fat cattle, happy children, and another year of life. A poor flood, too little water, meant hardship. It meant the crops would struggle, the harvests would be thin, and families would tighten their belts and pray for better fortune next year. And a flood that was too high, that was perhaps the worst of all. Too much water could wash away homes, drown livestock, destroy the very villages that depended on the river's generosity. But most years, the flood was just right. The river rose, spread across the valley floor like a great calm lake, and then slowly, gradually, over the course of several months, it receded again, leaving behind that miraculous gift of dark, fertile earth. This was the rhythm of Egyptian life, not the ticking of clocks or the turning of calendars as we know them, but the breathing of the river, rise and fall, flood and recession, planting and harvest, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. The Egyptians divided their year into 3 seasons, each one defined by the river's behavior. The first season was called Ake, the season of inundation. This was the time when the floodwaters covered the land, when farming was impossible, and when the people turned to other work. It was during Ake, historians believe, that many of the pyramid builders did their labor. With no fields to tend, the farmers became construction workers, lending their strength to the great projects of the pharaohs. The second season was Parade, the season of emergence. This was when the waters pulled back, revealing the freshly deposited soil. The farmers would return to their fields, plowing the soft earth with simple wooden plows pulled by oxen, scattering seeds of wheat and barley and flax, and watching with satisfaction as the green shoots emerged from the black ground. The third season was Shimu, the season of harvest. This was the time of plenty, when the grain was cut and gathered, when the granaries were filled, and when the people celebrated their good fortune with festivals and offerings to the gods. And then, as Shima drew to a close and the summer heat grew intense, the cycle would begin again. The river would start to rise, the flood would return, and the eternal rhythm would continue. This rhythm shaped everything about Egyptian civilization. It shaped their religion. They worshipped Hapi, the god of the flood, depicting him as a plump, generous figure with heavy breasts symbolizing abundance and nourishment. It shaped their government. The pharaohs derived much of their power from their supposed ability to ensure good floods, to intercede with the gods on behalf of their people. It shaped their art, their architecture, their philosophy, their entire understanding of existence. The Egyptians believed in cycles. They believed that the universe operated according to a principle they called Maat, a concept that encompassed truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. The rising and falling of the Nile was, to them, the most profound expression of Maat. It was proof that the universe was fundamentally good, fundamentally orderly, fundamentally designed to sustain life. And this belief, this deep, unshakable faith in the goodness of cosmic order, gave them the confidence to attempt things that might otherwise seem impossible, like building pyramids. You see, the pyramids were not acts of desperation. They were not built by slaves under the lash, as Hollywood would have us believe. They were built by people who believed in the fundamental orderliness of the universe, people who trusted that if they did their part, if they worked hard and honored the gods and maintained Maat, the river would continue to rise, the crops would continue to grow, and life would continue to flourish. The pyramids were expressions of confidence. They were monuments to a civilization that looked at the world and saw not chaos, but harmony. Not struggle, but cooperation. Not scarcity, but abundance. And that abundance began with the river. Let us walk along its banks for a moment, you and I. Let us feel the soft mud between our toes, still damp from the receding flood. Let us breathe in the smell of the water, that rich, earthy, living smell that the Egyptians knew so well. Along the riverbanks, you would see villages, small clusters of mud brick houses, their walls thick to keep out the heat, their roofs flat, so that families could sleep outside on summer nights when the air was too warm for comfort. Narrow lanes wound between the houses, shaded by palm trees and acacia, alive with the sounds of daily life. Children playing in the dust, women grinding grain on stone querns, the rhythmic scraping sound a constant backdrop to village life. Men mending fishing nets or repairing tools, preparing for the work ahead. Goats and chickens wandering freely, searching for scraps. Dogs sleeping in patches of shade, too lazy to bark at passing strangers. Life in these villages was simple, but it was not harsh. The river provided fish in abundance, tilapia and perch and catfish, caught with nets or spears, or simple hooks, baited with bread. The fields provided grain for bread and beer, the two staples of the Egyptian diet. Date palms provided sweetness. Vegetables grew easily in the rich soil, onions and garlic and lettuce and cucumbers and beans. The people who lived here were not wealthy by any modern standard. They did not have gold or jewels or fine furniture, but they had enough. They had food and shelter and community. They had the rhythm of the river to guide their days. They had the warmth of family and the comfort of tradition. And when the pharaoh called upon them to help build his eternal monument, many of them answered willingly. This might surprise you. We are so accustomed to thinking of great construction projects as acts of oppression, forced labor, slavery, suffering. And certainly, there was hardship involved in building the pyramids. The work was hard. The hours were long. Men were injured. Men died. But the evidence suggests that most of the workers were not slaves. They were conscripted laborers, yes, but conscription in ancient Egypt was not quite the same as slavery. It was more like a tax, a duty owed to the state. Farmers who could not work their fields during the flood season would travel to the construction sites, put in their time, and return home when the waters receded and the planting season began. In exchange, they received food, shelter, and medical care. They received the satisfaction of contributing to something monumental, something that would last forever. They received, perhaps, a sense of purpose and meaning that the quiet routine of village life could not always provide. And they received something else, too, something intangible but powerful. They received the knowledge that they were participating in the cosmic order. They were helping to ensure that their pharaoh, their living God, would successfully navigate the afterlife and continue to intercede on behalf of his people for all eternity. The pyramids were not just tombs. They were machines of immortality. They were ladders to the sky, designed to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to join the gods among the stars. And every stone that was placed, every block that was lifted, was a prayer made solid, a hope made permanent, a belief made eternal. This is what the river taught the Egyptians, that life was cyclical, that death was not an ending but a transformation, that the waters would always return, the crops would always grow, and the cosmic order would always be maintained, as long as the people did their part. The Nile did not just water the fields of Egypt. It watered the imagination. It nurtured a civilization capable of dreaming on a scale that still astonishes us today, 5,000 years later. And it all began here, with the slow rise and fall of dark waters, carrying the promise of life, from distant mountains to waiting fields. So as you settle deeper into your pillow, as your breathing grows slower and more even, imagine yourself beside that ancient river. Feel the warmth of the Egyptian night. Hear the soft lapping of water against the muddy bank. See the stars emerging overhead, the same stars that the pyramid builders watched as they rested from their labors. The river flows on. It has always flowed. It will always flow. And tonight, it carries you gently toward sleep, just as it once carried the dreams of an entire civilization toward the impossible monuments that still stand, silent and patient, beneath the desert sky. Rest now. The story continues, but there is no hurry. The river moves slowly, and so shall we. Now that we have walked beside the river, now that we have felt the rhythm of the flood and understood how it shaped the lives of ordinary Egyptians, let us turn our attention to someone extraordinary, the pharaoh. Say that word slowly, too. Pharaoh. It comes from the Egyptian phrase pharaoh, which meant great house, originally referring not to the king himself, but to the royal palace. Over time, the word came to mean the person who lived within that great house, the ruler, the king, the living God, because that is what the pharaoh was, in the minds of his people. Not merely a powerful man, not merely a wealthy ruler, but a god in human form, walking among mortals, serving as the bridge between the earthly world and the divine realm above. Tonight, we try to understand what that meant. We try to feel, even if only dimly, the weight of belief that surrounded the pharaoh like a golden cloak. We try to imagine what it would be like to live in a world where the man on the throne was not simply your king, but your connection to eternity itself. The Egyptians believed that the universe was populated by gods, dozens of them, hundreds, perhaps, gods of the sun and the moon, of the river and the desert, of war and love, and wisdom and death. These gods were not distant, abstract beings. They were present, active, involved in the daily affairs of the world. They needed to be honored, appeased, celebrated. They needed offerings and prayers and temples built in their names. And at the center of this divine cosmos stood the pharaoh. He was Horus incarnate. Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, the son of Osiris and Isis, the rightful ruler of all Egypt. When a pharaoh sat upon the throne, he was not merely representing Horus. He was Horus in living flesh, descended to earth to maintain order and justice among human beings. This was not metaphor. This was not symbolism. This was literal truth, as far as the Egyptians were concerned. The pharaoh was divine. His word was law. His will was sacred. And his death, when it eventually came, was not an ending, but a transformation. For when the pharaoh died, he became Osiris. Osiris, the god of the underworld. Osiris, the lord of the dead. Osiris, who had himself died and been resurrected, who ruled over the realm of the afterlife with gentle justice, who offered hope to all Egyptians that death was not the final word. This transformation, from living Horus to eternal Osiris, was the central mystery of Egyptian religion, and the pyramid was the machine that made it possible. You see, the Egyptians believed that a human being was made up of several different parts. There was the physical body, of course, the flesh and bone that walked and ate and slept. But there was also the Ka, which we might translate as the life force or vital essence. There was the Ba, often depicted as a bird with a human head, which was something like the personality or individual soul. There was the Ak, the transformed spirit that could dwell among the stars. And there were other components too, the shadow, the name, the heart, each one essential to the complete human being. When a person died, these components did not simply vanish. They separated, yes. They went their different ways. But if the proper rituals were performed, if the body was preserved through mummification, if the correct spells were spoken and the appropriate offerings were made, then these components could be reunited. The deceased could live again, not in this world, but in the next. For ordinary Egyptians, this process was important but relatively simple. A modest tomb, some grave goods, the prayers of family members, these would suffice to ensure a comfortable afterlife. But for the pharaoh, for the living god, the stakes were infinitely higher. If the pharaoh failed to achieve immortality, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not just for him, but for all of Egypt. For the pharaoh was the linchpin of cosmic order. He was the one who maintained Maat, who kept chaos at bay, who ensured that the sun would rise and the Nile would flood and the crops would grow. If his soul was lost, if his transformation failed, then the entire universe might unravel. And so the pyramid was built, not as a monument to ego, though certainly the pharaohs had egos, not as a display of wealth, though certainly the pyramids required enormous resources. The pyramid was built as a necessity, a sacred obligation, a cosmic duty. The pyramid was, first and foremost, a tomb, a place to house the pharaoh's mummified body, protected from thieves and decay, preserved for all eternity. The body was essential. Without it, the Ka would have nowhere to return, the Ba would have no anchor, and the transformation into an Ak would be impossible. But the pyramid was more than just a tomb. It was also a temple, a place where priests would come, generation after generation, to make offerings and speak prayers on behalf of the deceased king. These offerings were not symbolic. The Egyptians believed that the Ka actually consumed the spiritual essence of the food and drink that was left at the tomb. Without these offerings, the pharaoh's spirit would grow hungry, weak, unable to perform its cosmic duties. And the pyramid was something else, too. something harder to put into words. It was a ladder, a ramp, a stairway to the sky. The earliest pyramids, the step pyramids, like the famous one built for King Djoser at Saqqara, made this function explicit. They were literally staircases, rising in great steps toward the heavens, providing a path for the pharaoh's spirit to climb from earth to sky, from mortality to eternity. The later pyramids, the true pyramids with their smooth, sloping sides, served the same purpose in a different way. Their shape was meant to evoke the rays of the sun, slanting down from heaven to earth. The pharaoh's spirit would climb those rays like a beam of light, ascending to join Ra, the sun god, in his eternal journey across the sky. The very stones of the pyramid were aligned with astonishing precision to the cardinal directions and to specific stars. The north-facing shafts of the Great Pyramid, for instance, pointed directly toward the circumpolar stars, the stars that never set, that wheel eternally around the celestial pole, that the Egyptians called the imperishable ones. These were the stars where the pharaoh's spirit would dwell. Among the imperishable ones, he would shine forever, looking down upon his beloved Egypt, continuing to guide and protect his people even from beyond the grave. This is what the pharaoh wished for. This is what he whispered to the sky in his prayers and his dreams. Not merely to be remembered, though that was part of it. Not merely to be honored, though that mattered too, but to be transformed, to become eternal, to take his rightful place among the gods and continue his sacred work forever. And this wish was not selfish, or at least, it was not only selfish. The pharaoh believed, and his people believed with him, that his immortality was essential to their survival. If he succeeded in his transformation, he would continue to maintain Maat from his place among the stars. He would continue to ensure that the sun rose, and the Nile flooded, and the crops grew. He would continue to protect Egypt from chaos and darkness and death. The pyramid, then, was not just a gift from the people to their king. It was a gift from the king to his people. It was his promise that he would never abandon them, that he would continue to watch over them, that his love for Egypt would outlast even death itself. Imagine being that pharaoh. Imagine standing on the roof of your palace at night, looking up at the stars, knowing that one day, perhaps soon, perhaps many years from now, you will be among them. Imagine the weight of that knowledge, the responsibility, the hope, the fear. For the pharaohs were human too, despite their divine status, despite the elaborate rituals and the golden crowns and the armies of servants. They were men who loved and grieved and worried and dreamed. They had mothers who nursed them, and fathers who taught them, and wives who comforted them, and children who disappointed or delighted them. They knew they would die. Everyone knew they would die. The Egyptians were not a people who denied death or pretended it would not come. They faced it directly, practically, with elaborate preparations and careful planning. Death was not a tragedy to be avoided, but a transition to be managed. And the pyramid was the ultimate expression of that management. It was the pharaoh's way of saying, I am ready. I have done everything in my power to ensure that my transformation will succeed. I have built my ladder to the sky. I have prepared my body for preservation. I have arranged for priests to make offerings on my behalf for generations to come. Now we come to one of the most remarkable parts of our story, the part that makes people shake their heads in disbelief, the part that seems, at first glance, utterly impossible. The ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids did not have iron. Let that sink in for a moment. No iron tools, no steel chisels, no hardened metal blades capable of biting into stone with ease. The Iron Age had not yet dawned in Egypt. It would not arrive for another 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid was completed. And yet, somehow, they carved millions of stone blocks. They shaped granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. They created surfaces so smooth and joints so precise that you cannot slip a piece of paper between them. Even today, 5 millennia later. How did they do it? The answer is both humbling and beautiful. They did it with patience. They did it with skill passed down through generations. They did it with tools that seem almost laughably inadequate to our modern eyes, and yet proved more than sufficient for the task at hand. Tonight, let us examine those tools. Let us hold them in our imagination, feel their weight, understand their limitations and their quiet power. For in these simple implements lies one of the greatest lessons the pyramids have to teach us. That human ingenuity, combined with patience and determination, can accomplish almost anything. The primary metal available to the pyramid builders was copper. Copper is a soft metal. If you have ever held a copper penny or a copper pipe, you know this instinctively. It bends. It dents. It dulls quickly when used against hard surfaces. Compared to iron or steel, copper seems almost useless for heavy work. And yet, copper was the metal that built the pyramids. The Egyptians had been working with copper for over 1,000 years, by the time the Great Pyramid was constructed. They mined it from the Sinai Peninsula, that rugged triangle of desert and mountain that bridges Africa and Asia. They smelted it in simple furnaces, heated by charcoal fires, fanned by bellows made of animal skin. They poured the molten metal into stone molds, creating tools of various shapes and sizes. Chisels mostly. Copper chisels with flat blades, pointed tips, rounded edges. Chisels designed for different purposes, some for rough cutting, some for fine detail work, some for prying, some for scraping. A skilled stoneworker might own dozens of chisels, each one suited to a particular task. The secret to using copper tools on stone was not strength. It was patience. A copper chisel could not simply be driven into limestone with brute force. The metal was too soft for that. It would bend, deform, become useless within minutes. Instead, the workers used a gentle, rhythmic technique. Tap, 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 slowly wearing away the stone grain by grain, millimeter by millimeter. The limestone used for most of the pyramid's bulk was relatively soft, as stones go. Freshly quarried limestone contains moisture, making it even softer and easier to work. The Egyptians understood this and would often work the stone immediately after extraction, before it had time to dry and harden in the desert air. With patience and skill, a copper chisel could shape limestone quite effectively. The workers would score lines into the surface, then carefully chip away the stone along those lines. They would smooth the faces with flat copper blades, removing any irregularities. They would check their work constantly, using simple tools, straight edges made of wood, plumb bobs dangling from strings, to ensure that every surface was true. But what about granite? Granite. This is where the story becomes truly remarkable. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. It is composed of interlocking crystals of quartz, feldspar, and mica, minerals so hard that they will scratch glass, that they will dull even modern steel tools with alarming speed. The idea of cutting granite with copper seems absurd. It would be like trying to carve a diamond with a butter knife. And yet, the Egyptians did it. The king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid is built entirely of granite. Massive blocks weighing dozens of tons, transported from quarries hundreds of miles away, cut with astonishing precision, fitted together with barely visible seams. How? The answer lies not in the copper itself, but in what the copper was used with. The Egyptians discovered that copper tools, when combined with an abrasive slurry of sand and water, became capable of cutting even the hardest stone. Here is how it worked. The copper tool, whether a chisel, a saw, or a drill, would be pressed against the granite surface. Sand, wetted with water to form a thick paste, would be poured into the contact point. Then the tool would be moved back and forth, or rotated in the case of a drill. The copper itself did almost no cutting. Instead, it served as a carrier for the sand. The sand grains, tiny, incredibly hard particles of quartz, would become embedded in the soft copper surface. As the tool moved, these embedded sand grains would scrape against the granite, slowly grinding it away. The copper wore down too, of course. It wore down quickly, but copper was relatively plentiful and could be easily reshaped. A worn-out chisel could be melted down and recast. A dulled saw blade could be hammered flat and re-edged. The sand did the real work. The copper was merely the vehicle. This technique, using soft metal tools with hard abrasive particles, is still used today in certain industrial applications. The Egyptians discovered independently, through centuries of experimentation and observation, without any of the scientific knowledge we now possess about mineralogy and material science. They did not know why it worked. They only knew that it did. And so they ground their way through granite, one grain of sand at a time, patient, persistent, unstoppable. But copper chisels and sand-abrasive saws were not the only tools in the Egyptian stoneworkers' kit. For certain tasks, they used something even simpler: stone itself. Dolerite pounders were among the most important tools for quarry work. Dolerite is a hard, dense, dark-colored stone, harder even than granite. The Egyptians would collect balls of dolerite, smooth and heavy, fitting comfortably in the hand. These pounders would be used to bash away at the granite, breaking it apart through sheer percussive force. It sounds crude, and in a way it was. But it worked. The quarrymen would sit beside the granite bedrock, pounding away hour after hour, day after day, slowly creating trenches around the block they wanted to extract. The rhythmic thudding of stone against stone would echo through the quarries, a sound as constant and regular as a heartbeat. Pound, pound, pound. A centimeter of progress per hour, perhaps, maybe less, but progress nonetheless. And over weeks and months, that progress added up. A block would be freed, then another, then another. Slowly, patiently, the mountain would yield its treasure. The dolerite pounders themselves would wear down too, of course. They would crack and crumble, reduced to rubble by their own violent work. Archaeologists have found thousands of these broken pounders at the Aswan quarries, silent witnesses to the enormous labor that went into extracting the granite used for the pyramids. There were other tools too. Wooden wedges, used to split stone along natural fracture lines. The Egyptians would cut slots into the rock, insert dry wooden wedges, then soak them with water. As the wood absorbed the moisture, it would swell with irresistible force, cracking the stone apart along the desired line. Copper saws, long and thin, used with sand abrasive to cut through large blocks. Some of these saws were over 2 meters long, requiring 2 men to operate, one on each end, pulling back and forth in steady rhythm, hour after hour. Copper drills, some operated by hand, others using bow drill mechanisms for greater speed. These could bore holes into the hardest stone, allowing the workers to create complex shapes, to hollow out sarcophagi, to carve the intricate hieroglyphics that adorned the tomb walls. Rubbing stones, used for final polishing. Blocks of sandstone or quartzite, rubbed back and forth across the cut surfaces until they gleamed smooth as glass. And everywhere, in everything, sand. Sand mixed with water. Sand embedded in copper. Sand scattered across work surfaces. Sand in the workers' hair, their clothes, their food, their lungs. The desert provided an inexhaustible supply of this humble abrasive, and the Egyptians used it with masterful efficiency. What strikes me most about these tools is not their ingenuity, though they were certainly ingenious. What strikes me is the patience they required. We live in an age of power tools and instant results. We expect a job to be done quickly, efficiently, with minimal effort. The idea of spending hours to cut a single groove in a piece of stone seems almost unbearable to us. The idea of spending years, decades, to build a single structure seems impossible. But the Egyptians had a different relationship with time. Let us leave the workshop now, with its gleaming copper tools and worn wooden benches. Let us step outside, into the warm Egyptian morning, and walk toward the place where the pyramid truly began, the quarry. Not a distant quarry, mind you. Not some faraway mountain or remote canyon. The limestone that formed the bulk of the Great Pyramid, the millions upon millions of blocks that make up its enormous mass, came from quarries located just a few hundred meters from the pyramid itself. This is one of the great practical secrets of pyramid construction. The ancient Egyptians were not fools. They did not transport stone unnecessarily across vast distances when perfectly good stone lay sleeping in the earth right beneath their feet. They chose the location of the pyramid, at least in part, because of the stone that was already there, waiting to be awakened. Tonight, we visit those quarries. We descend into the cuts and trenches carved into the Giza Plateau. We watch the workers coaxing stone from the bedrock, block by block, with patience and skill. And we come to understand that the pyramid did not rise from the desert so much as it emerged from it. The same stone, rearranged into a new and magnificent form. The Giza Plateau is made of limestone, layer upon layer of it, deposited millions of years ago when this part of Africa lay beneath a shallow tropical sea. The tiny shells of countless sea creatures, foraminifera, they are called, drifted down to the seafloor over millions of years, accumulating in thick beds that eventually hardened into stone. This stone is called nummulitic limestone, named after the coin-shaped fossils that pepper its surface. If you look closely at a block from the Great Pyramid, you can still see these fossils, tiny spirals and discs, the remains of creatures that lived and died long before the first dinosaur walked the earth. The Egyptians did not know about foraminifera or ancient seas, but they knew the stone. They knew its qualities intimately, which layers were hard, which were soft, which would split cleanly, which would crumble. They had been working this stone for generations, and their knowledge was deep and practical. The quarrymen would begin by studying the rock face, looking for natural fracture lines, for variations in color and texture that indicated different qualities of stone. They were geologists without knowing it, reading the earth like a book written in a language only they could understand. Once they had identified a promising area, the work would begin. First, the workers would clear away the surface layer, the weathered, crumbly stone exposed to sun and wind, unsuitable for building. This overburden would be carried away in baskets, dumped in piles that grew into small hills over the years of construction. Then, once the good stone was exposed, the quarrymen would begin to mark out their blocks. They used simple tools for this: wooden stakes driven into the rock, ropes stretched between them to create straight lines, red ochre powder dusted along the ropes to leave visible marks. The resulting grid would show exactly where each block would be cut, how large it would be, how it would be oriented within the bedrock. The standard blocks used in the pyramid's core were roughly 1 cubic meter in size, about 1 meter long, 1 meter wide, and 1 meter tall. Each one weighed approximately 2.5 tons. Not impossibly heavy, but certainly not light. These blocks required careful handling at every stage of their journey, from quarry to pyramid. Once the blocks were marked, the cutting began. Teams of workers would position themselves along the marked lines, copper chisels in hand. They would begin to cut trenches around each block, narrow channels, just wide enough for a man to stand in, that would eventually free the stone from the bedrock on all sides. The work was slow. Hour after hour, day after day, the workers would tap their chisels into the stone, removing small chips with each blow. The trenches would deepen gradually, a few centimeters per day, perhaps. The sound of metal on stone would echo across the plateau, a constant percussion that became the heartbeat of the construction site. When the trenches around a block were deep enough, typically about 1 meter or so, the workers would turn their attention to the bottom. This was the most delicate part of the operation. The block needed to be separated from the bedrock beneath it without cracking or damaging the stone. For this, they used wooden wedges. The workers would cut a series of slots along the bottom edge of the block, small rectangular holes, evenly spaced, running the entire width of the stone. Into each slot, they would insert a dry wooden wedge. Then, carefully and systematically, they would pour water over the wedges. And then they would wait. Wood absorbs water. As it does, it swells. The force of this swelling is enormous, far greater than any human muscle could provide. Slowly, inexorably, the wooden wedges would expand, pressing against the sides of their slots, creating pressure that spread through the stone along its natural grain. Crack! The sound would come suddenly, after hours or even days of patient waiting. A sharp report, like a branch breaking, echoing up from the quarry floor, and the block would be free, separated from the bedrock that had held it for millions of years, ready to begin its journey to the pyramid. The freed block would then need to be moved, first lifted from its bed, then transported out of the quarry, then hauled to the construction site. We will speak more of transportation later. For now, let us simply note that the quarry work did not end with the cutting. Teams of workers with wooden levers and ropes would maneuver the heavy blocks onto wooden sledges, ready for the next stage of their journey. And as soon as one block was removed, work would begin on the next. The quarries of Giza were not a single pit, but a complex of interconnected excavations. Some areas produced high-quality stone suitable for the pyramid's outer casing. Others yielded rougher material, adequate for the inner core where precision mattered less. Still others provided stone for the ramps and causeways that crisscrossed the construction site. The quarrymen worked in teams, each team responsible for a particular section of the quarry. They had names, these teams, colorful names that archaeologists have discovered inscribed on some of the pyramid blocks themselves. Friends of Khufu. One team called themselves Drunkards of Menkaure, proclaimed another. These were not official designations, but nicknames, jokes, expressions of camaraderie and team spirit. For the quarry was not just a workplace. It was a community. Men who spent years working side by side in the trenches formed bonds of friendship that lasted a lifetime. They shared meals together, told stories together, complained about their foreman together. They took pride in their work, competing with other teams to see who could extract the most blocks, who could cut the cleanest edges, who could work the fastest without sacrificing quality. Life in the quarry followed its own rhythm, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Work began at dawn, when the air was still cool and the stone was damp with dew. The morning hours were the most productive. Chisels bit more easily into moist limestone, and the workers' energy was fresh. As the sun climbed higher and the heat intensified, the pace would slow. The hottest hours of the day were often spent in the shade, resting, eating, maintaining tools. Copper chisels dulled quickly and needed constant resharpening. Wooden handles cracked and required replacement. Ropes frayed and had to be respliced. In the late afternoon, as the shadows lengthened and the air began to cool, work would resume. The quarrymen would labor until the light failed, then make their way back to the workers' village for the evening meal and sleep. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, the quarries deepened and widened, spreading across the plateau like a slow-growing wound in the earth. The pyramid rose in tandem, consuming the stone as fast as the quarrymen could produce it. Archaeologists estimate that the Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. Most of these came from the local quarries, perhaps 90% or more. The quarrymen of Giza extracted and moved more stone than any quarrying operation in history, before or since. And they did it with copper chisels, wooden wedges, and their own two hands. There's something almost meditative about quarry work when you think about it. The repetitive motion of the chisel, the patient waiting for the wedges to swell, the slow revelation of the stone's inner character as layer after layer is removed. The quarrymen came to know the stone intimately. They could feel the vibrations through their chisels, sense when a block was about to crack, predict where the natural fracture lines would run. This was not scientific knowledge. It was intuition, developed over years of practice, passed down from master to apprentice through countless generations. We have walked through the local quarries of Giza, where limestone slept just beneath the pyramid shadow. But now, let us travel further, much further. Let us journey southward, up the Nile, against the current, to a place where the stone is different, harder, more beautiful, more precious. Aswan. The name itself sounds like a whisper. Aswan, a soft exhalation, like wind moving through palm fronds, like water lapping against the hull of a boat. Say it slowly, and let it carry you 600 miles up the river, to the very edge of ancient Egypt, where the first cataract marked the boundary between the known world and the mysterious lands beyond. Here at Aswan, the bedrock changes. The soft limestone of the north gives way to something far more ancient and enduring granite. Pink granite, red granite, stone so hard that it laughs at copper chisels, so dense that it rings like a bell when struck, so beautiful that the Egyptians reserved it for the most sacred spaces in their monuments. The king's chamber of the Great Pyramid is built entirely of Aswan granite. The massive sarcophagus that once held Khufu's mummified body was carved from a single block of this rose-colored stone. The towering obelisks that grace temple courtyards throughout Egypt were quarried here, in this remote southern outpost. Tonight we visit Aswan. We watch the quarrymen wrestling with stone that refuses to yield. We see the great blocks loaded onto boats and begin their long, dreamlike journey down the Nile. And we marvel, once again, at what human patience and ingenuity can accomplish. Aswan was not a convenient location. It was, in fact, extraordinarily inconvenient. 600 miles from Giza, a journey that would take weeks by boat, even traveling with the current. The cataracts of the Nile made navigation treacherous in places. The desert heat was more intense here, closer to the tropics. Everything about Aswan said, "Go elsewhere, find easier stone, spare yourself the trouble." But the Egyptians came anyway. They came because the granite of Aswan was irreplaceable. No other stone in Egypt possessed its combination of hardness, beauty, and workability. No other stone could serve the sacred purposes for which granite was required. You see, granite was not merely a building material. It was a symbol. Its hardness represented eternity, the unchanging, enduring nature of the pharaoh's power and the gods' protection. Its pink and red hues evoked the flesh of the gods themselves, who were said to have bodies of gold and hair of lapis lazuli and skin of precious red stone. To build the king's chamber from granite was to create a space worthy of the gods. To carve a sarcophagus from granite was to provide the pharaoh with an eternal vessel that would never decay, never crumble, never fail. The difficulty of working granite was not a drawback, it was the point. Only something so hard to achieve could be worthy of eternity. The quarrying process at Aswan was fundamentally different from the limestone work at Giza. Copper chisels were almost useless against granite. The stone was simply too hard. A copper blade would dull and deform within minutes, accomplishing nothing but frustration. Instead, the Aswan quarrymen relied primarily on dolerite pounders, those heavy balls of dark, dense stone that we mentioned earlier. Dolerite is harder than granite, and when wielded with sufficient force, it can slowly batter the granite into submission. Slowly being the operative word. The work was measured not in centimeters per hour, but in millimeters per day. A quarryman might spend an entire morning pounding away at a single spot, raising and dropping his dolerite ball again and again and again, pulverizing the granite surface grain by grain, creating a shallow depression that would gradually deepen into a trench. The sound was extraordinary. Dozens of workers, sometimes hundreds, all pounding in rhythm. The thudding echoed off the quarry walls, reverberating across the desert, audible from miles away. Visitors to modern Aswan sometimes report that they can almost hear it still, a ghostly percussion, the heartbeat of ancient labor, embedded somehow in the stone itself. The most famous remnant of this ancient work is the unfinished obelisk, still lying in the Aswan quarries today. It would have been the largest obelisk ever erected, over 40 meters long, weighing more than 1,000 tons. But during the quarrying process, cracks appeared in the stone. The project was abandoned, the obelisk left in its bed, a silent witness to the ambition and the heartbreak of ancient engineering. If you visit Aswan today, you can see the tool marks on the unfinished obelisk, the pounding marks of dolerite balls, the channels cut around its perimeter, the places where workers began to undercut the stone, trying to free it from the bedrock. It is like a frozen moment in time, a window into a workday that ended 3,000 years ago and never resumed. But most obelisks were successfully extracted. Most granite blocks made it out of the quarry and onto the boats that would carry them northward. And it is this journey, the long, slow voyage down the Nile, that we now turn our attention to. Imagine the scene. A massive granite block, weighing perhaps 40 or 50 tons, has been freed from the bedrock after months of pounding and cutting. It lies on the quarry floor, pink and beautiful, waiting for the next stage of its journey. First, it must be moved to the river. The Egyptians built ramps and causeways from the quarries down to the Nile's edge. These were not gentle slopes, but steep inclines, requiring careful control to prevent the massive blocks from running away and crushing everything in their path. Teams of workers with ropes and wooden brakes would guide each block down the ramp, letting gravity do most of the work while maintaining just enough control to prevent disaster. At the river's edge, barges waited. These were not ordinary boats. They were massive wooden vessels, specially constructed to carry loads that would sink any normal craft. Some archaeologists believe they were built from Lebanese cedar, strong, lightweight wood imported at great expense from the mountains of modern-day Lebanon. Others suggest they were made from native acacia, carefully joined and reinforced to handle the enormous stresses involved. Loading the granite onto these barges was an operation of extraordinary delicacy. The blocks were maneuvered onto wooden platforms at the water's edge. The barges were positioned alongside, partially flooded to lower them in the water. Then, as the blocks were slid aboard, the barges would be gradually pumped out, rising in the water as they took on their precious cargo. It was a balancing act. Too much weight on one side, and the barge would capsize. Too little flotation, and it would sink. The loading crews had to understand the physics of buoyancy and leverage, even if they did not have words for these concepts. They had to feel the balance of the boat, sense when it was safe to add more weight, know when to stop. And then, finally, the journey would begin. The Nile flows north. From Aswan to Giza, the current would carry the granite barges naturally, effortlessly, as long as the crews could navigate the obstacles along the way. The first cataract, just north of Aswan, was the first challenge, a stretch of rapids and rocky outcrops that required skilled piloting to traverse. Special channels had been cut through the rocks in some places, allowing the heavy barges to pass safely. Beyond the cataract, the river widened and calmed. The barges would drift northward, guided by long steering oars, accompanied by smaller boats carrying the crews and their supplies. The journey would take weeks, perhaps a month or more, depending on the season and the condition of the river. Imagine being one of those boatmen. Imagine lying on the deck of your barge at night, the stars wheeling overhead, the gentle rocking of the boat beneath you, the soft gurgle of the Nile flowing past. Behind you, a block of pink granite, stone that had slept in the earth for billions of years, stone that you and your companions had labored for months to extract, stone that would soon become part of a monument that would stand for millennia. The journey down the Nile must have been a time of rest and reflection. The hard work of quarrying was done. The hard work of construction had not yet begun. For these few weeks, the boatmen had nothing to do but guide their precious cargo northward, watching the landscape drift slowly past, eating and sleeping and telling stories under the Egyptian stars. They passed villages and towns, temples and tombs. They saw farmers working in the fields, fishermen casting their nets, children playing on the riverbanks. Life along the Nile continued as it always had. The eternal rhythm of planting and harvest, of flood and recession, of birth and death and birth again. And through it all, the granite floated on, silent and patient, waiting to fulfill its destiny. Some of these boatmen would never see the completed pyramid. The construction took over 20 years, and many of the workers who contributed to the early stages did not live to see the final result. But they knew what they were building. They knew that their labor mattered. They knew that the stone they carried would become part of something eternal. Now we come to another impossibility, another moment where the modern mind struggles to comprehend what the ancient Egyptians achieved. Another quiet miracle hiding in plain sight. The pyramid builders had no wheels. Let that settle into your mind for a moment. No wheels, no carts, no wagons, no rolling platforms to carry heavy loads across the desert sand. The wheel, that most fundamental of human inventions, that simple circle that transformed transportation forever. It played no role in building the pyramids. The wheel existed, of course. It had been invented in Mesopotamia centuries earlier, and the Egyptians were certainly aware of it. They used wheels in pottery making, spinning clay on rotating discs. They may have used wheeled vehicles for certain purposes in later periods, but for moving the massive stone blocks of the pyramids? No, wheels would have been useless. Think about it. A wheel works by reducing friction, by allowing a load to roll rather than slide. But wheels need firm, smooth surfaces to work properly. Try pushing a wheeled cart through soft sand, and you will quickly understand the problem. The wheels sink. They dig into the ground. What should reduce effort instead increases it tenfold. The Egyptians faced a landscape of sand and dust and loose gravel. Wheels would have been worse than useless. They would have been a hindrance. And so the pyramid builders turned to something simpler, something more elegant, something perfectly suited to their environment. The sledge. A sledge is simply a platform on runners, like a sled for snow, but designed for sand. The Egyptians built their sledges from sturdy wood, probably acacia or imported cedar. The runners were smooth and slightly curved at the front, allowing them to glide over obstacles rather than catching on them. The platform was strong enough to support loads of many tons. We know what these sledges looked like because the Egyptians left us pictures. In the tomb of a nobleman named Jehudi-Hotep, dating to around 1900 BCE, there's a famous painting showing a colossal statue being transported on a sledge. The statue is enormous. estimated to weigh about 60 tons. And there, in front of the sledge, stands a man pouring water onto the sand. Water. This is the secret. This is the simple, elegant solution that made sledge transportation practical. Water transforms sand from an obstacle into an aid. Dry sand is loose and shifting. Try to drag something heavy across dry sand, and the grains pile up in front of your load, creating resistance that grows with every meter of progress. The friction is enormous. The effort required is backbreaking. But wet sand behaves differently. When water is added to sand, it binds the grains together, creating a firmer surface. The water lubricates the contact between the sledge runners and the ground, reducing friction dramatically. What was impossible becomes merely difficult. What was difficult becomes almost easy. Modern scientists have tested this technique. In experiments conducted at the University of Amsterdam, researchers found that wetting sand reduces the friction coefficient by almost 50%. A sledge that would require tremendous force to move across dry sand glides almost effortlessly across properly wetted sand. The Egyptians discovered this principle through trial and error, through generations of practical experience, through the accumulated wisdom of countless workers who paid attention to what worked and what didn't. They did not have laboratories or friction coefficients or scientific papers. They had observation, experimentation, and the hard-won knowledge of their craft. And so, across the Giza Plateau, a constant procession of sledges made their way from quarry to pyramid. Each sledge carried a single block, perhaps 2.5 tons of limestone, or even more for special blocks. Each sledge was pulled by a team of workers, perhaps 20 or 30 men, hauling on thick hemp ropes with all their strength. Ahead of each sledge walked the water bearers, pouring their precious liquid onto the sand in a careful, measured stream. Not too much water. That would create mud, which was just as bad as dry sand. Not too little. That would leave the sand loose and uncooperative. Just the right amount, creating a firm, slick surface that allowed the sledge to glide forward with minimal resistance. The routes from quarry to pyramid became well-established tracks, worn smooth by the passage of countless sledges. Some of these tracks may have been paved with wooden planks or flat stones, creating an even better surface for the sledges to travel on. Others were simply compacted earth, packed down by years of use until they were nearly as firm as rock. The logistics of the water supply alone were impressive. Each sledge required a continuous stream of water along its entire route. The water had to be carried from the Nile or from wells, stored in large vessels, distributed to the water bearers, and applied with precision. Thousands of gallons of water were used every day, just to keep the sledges moving. And the sledges moved constantly. From dawn to dusk, the procession continued, sledge after sledge, block after block, an endless river of stone flowing from quarry to pyramid. The sound of it must have been remarkable. The creaking of wooden sledges, the rhythmic chanting of the pulling crews, the splash of water on sand, the shuffling of hundreds of feet, all moving in unison. The pulling crews worked in shifts, rotating out when they grew tired, replaced by fresh teams ready to take up the ropes. The work was hard, but not impossible. A team of 30 men could move a 2-ton block at a steady walking pace, slow by modern standards, but fast enough to keep the construction on schedule. But pulling sledges across flat ground was only part of the challenge. The blocks also had to be lifted. They had to rise from ground level to the top of the growing pyramid, hundreds of feet in the air. No amount of water on sand could help with that. For lifting, the Egyptians used ramps. We will discuss ramps in greater detail in the next part of our story. But for now, understand that the sledges did not stop at the base of the pyramid. They continued up the ramps, still pulled by teams of workers, still gliding on their wooden runners, still preceded by water bearers dampening the path. The ramps were built of mud brick and rubble, packed firm and smooth. They wound around the pyramid or climbed its face directly, providing a continuous path from ground level to the working height. As the pyramid rose, the ramps rose with it, always reaching just high enough to allow the next course of blocks to be placed. The sledges climbed these ramps slowly, laboriously, one careful step at a time. The pulling crews strained against gravity now, not just friction. Additional teams were stationed along the ramps to help with the steepest sections. Wooden brakes were used to prevent the sledges from sliding backward if a rope broke or a team faltered. It was dangerous work. A sledge carrying a 2-ton block, sliding backward down a ramp, would be unstoppable. It would crush anything in its path. The workers knew this. They took precautions. They maintained their equipment. They watched for signs of trouble. But accidents happened. Men were injured. Men died. The pyramid extracted a price for its construction. Not a price paid in whips and chains, as the old stories would have it, but a price paid in sweat and strain and occasional tragedy. The workers accepted this price, as workers have always accepted the risks of their trades. They believed in what they were building. They believed it was worth the cost. And the pyramid rose. Let yourself be a water bearer tonight. Let your breath be the water. Pour gently onto the sand of your thoughts. Let each exhalation smooth the path ahead, preparing the way for sleep. Let the rhythm of your breathing carry you forward, step by step, moment by moment, into the quiet darkness. The sledges are still moving out there, somewhere in the desert of memory. The water is still flowing. The ropes are still straining. The pyramid is still rising, stone by stone, one slow step at a time. But you do not need to pull tonight. You do not need to lift or carry or strain. Tonight, you are the water, flowing, smoothing, easing the way. And the way leads to rest, to peace, to the soft embrace of sleep. Let go of the ropes. Set down the jar. The work will continue tomorrow. But tonight, the desert is cool and quiet, and the stars are bright overhead, and the pyramid waits patiently for the sun to rise again. Rest now. Dream of sledges gliding across wet sand. Dream of water sparkling in the sunlight. Dream of patient labor and quiet miracles and the slow, steady progress of great things being built. The night is your ramp, leading gently upward into sleep. Climb it slowly. There is no hurry. The summit will wait for you, patient and eternal, just as the pyramid has waited for 5,000 years. We have seen how the stone was quarried. We have watched it float down the Nile, from distant Aswan. We have followed the sledges as they glided across the wet sand, carrying their precious cargo toward the construction site. But now we face the greatest challenge of all. How do you lift a stone that weighs 2 tons? How do you raise it 10 feet, then 20, then 100, then 400? How do you build a mountain, one block at a time, when each block is heavier than a car and the mountain grows taller with every passing month? The answer, almost certainly, is ramps. Ramps are the simplest lifting technology imaginable. They convert a vertical lift into a horizontal pull. Instead of hoisting a block straight up, which would require enormous force, you drag it up a gentle slope, trading distance for effort. The longer the ramp, the gentler the slope. The gentler the slope, the easier the pull. The Egyptians understood this principle perfectly. They built ramps everywhere. Ramps from quarries to construction sites. Ramps from ground level to working platforms. Ramps that grew and changed as the pyramid itself grew and changed. The pyramid and its ramps were not separate things, but parts of a single system, each dependent on the other, each evolving together over the decades of construction. Tonight, we climb those ramps. We feel the slope beneath our feet. We watch the blocks rising, slowly but surely, toward the sky. And we marvel at the elegant simplicity of a solution that required nothing but earth, determination, and time. The exact design of the pyramid ramps has been debated by scholars for centuries. No definitive evidence survives. The ramps were temporary structures, dismantled after the pyramid was complete, their materials reused or scattered by time and weather. But based on archaeological clues, engineering calculations, and practical common sense, several theories have emerged. The simplest theory proposes a single straight ramp extending outward from one face of the pyramid. This ramp would start at ground level and climb at a gentle angle, perhaps 5 to 10 degrees, until it reached the current working height. As the pyramid grew taller, the ramp would be extended and raised, always keeping pace with the construction. The advantage of a straight ramp is its simplicity. A single path, easy to build, easy to maintain, easy to use. Workers could pull their sledges straight up without navigating any turns or corners. The logistics were straightforward. The disadvantage is the sheer size required. A ramp gentle enough to be practical would need to be enormously long. By the time the pyramid reached its full height of nearly 500 feet, a straight ramp with a 10-degree slope would have extended over half a mile from the base. The ramp itself would have contained more material than the pyramid, an absurd proposition. So perhaps the ramps were not straight. Perhaps they wrapped around the pyramid, spiraling upward like a corkscrew, following the outer edges of the structure as it rose. A spiral ramp would be much shorter than a straight ramp, requiring far less material. It could grow organically with the pyramid, each new course of blocks providing a foundation for the next section of ramp. A spiral ramp has its own challenges, of course. The corners would be difficult to navigate with heavy sledges. The outer edge of the pyramid would be obscured by the ramp, making it hard to check the alignment and ensure the structure was rising true. And at the very top, where the pyramid narrows to a point, there would be no room for any ramp at all. Perhaps, then, multiple ramp systems were used. A large straight ramp for the lower courses, where the blocks were heaviest and most numerous. A spiral ramp for the middle sections, where the work was still substantial, but the heights made a straight ramp impractical. And some other method, levers, perhaps, or internal ramps for the uppermost courses, where the blocks were smaller and fewer. One intriguing theory, proposed by the French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, suggests that the main ramps were not external but internal. According to this theory, a network of tunnels and passages was built into the pyramid itself, spiraling upward just beneath the surface. Blocks would be dragged up these internal ramps, emerging at each corner to be placed in their final positions. Internal ramps would leave no external trace, which might explain why we have found so little evidence of the ramp system. They would also allow the builders to check their alignment throughout the construction process, since the outer surface would remain visible and accessible. Some researchers claim to have found evidence of these internal ramps using ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, though the theory remains controversial. The truth is, we may never know exactly how the ramps were configured. The builders left no blueprints, no instruction manuals, no detailed accounts of their methods. What we have are the pyramids themselves, standing proof that the methods worked, whatever they were. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the specific details matter less than the general principle. The Egyptians needed to lift heavy stones to great heights. They solved this problem using ramps. The exact form of those ramps may have varied from pyramid to pyramid, from decade to decade, even from block to block. What matters is that they found solutions that worked, and they kept finding solutions, year after year, until the monument was complete. Let us imagine ourselves on one of those ramps now. Feel the slope beneath your feet, gentle but persistent, rising steadily toward the sky. The surface is packed earth and rubble, worn smooth by the passage of countless sledges. Wooden beams are embedded in the ramp at intervals, providing traction for the workers' feet and anchor points for the ropes. Ahead of you, a team of men strains against a heavy sledge, their bodies leaning forward, their legs driving into the slope. Behind them, the sledge creaks and groans, its runners scraping against the ramp surface, its cargo of limestone rocking slightly with each surge of effort. A water bearer walks alongside, dampening the path just ahead of the runners, keeping the friction low. The chant of the pulling crew rises and falls in rhythm with their steps. Heave, step, heave, step. A foreman walks beside them, calling out the cadence, encouraging the tired, steadying the pace. The sun beats down, relentless, but the work continues. It always continues. When the sledge reaches the working level, a new challenge begins. The block must be unloaded, maneuvered into position, and placed with precision. This work requires a different kind of effort, not brute strength, but careful coordination, not speed, but accuracy. Wooden levers are inserted beneath the block, and teams of workers pry it upward, fraction by fraction, while others slide wooden rollers or stone wedges into the gap. The block is walked sideways, pivoted on its corners, nudged into alignment. The foremen check constantly with plumb bobs and straight edges, ensuring that each block is level, that each course is true, that the pyramid is rising exactly as planned. The precision achieved was remarkable. The base of the Great Pyramid is level to within a few centimeters across its entire 230-meter length. The corners are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that would challenge modern surveying equipment. The blocks fit together so tightly that, in many places, you cannot insert a knife blade between them. This precision was not accidental. It was not the result of alien technology or lost knowledge. It was the result of careful work, constant checking, and a culture that valued accuracy above speed. The Egyptians took their time. They did things right. They understood that a monument intended to last for eternity deserved to be built with eternal care. And so the pyramid rose, course by course, year by year. Each new level was slightly smaller than the one below, the wall stepping inward as the structure climbed toward the sky. The ramps rose with it, always just high enough to reach the current working level, constantly being extended and modified as the needs of construction changed. The workers on the ramps could see their progress. Unlike modern construction workers, who might labor on a single floor of a skyscraper for months without seeing the overall shape emerge, the pyramid builders watched their monument grow before their eyes. Each week, each month, the pyramid was visibly taller, visibly closer to completion. This must have been encouraging, motivating, a reminder that their labor had meaning, that their efforts were producing something real and lasting. The pyramid was not an abstraction or a plan on paper. It was stone and sky, mass and shape, a physical presence that dominated the landscape and grew more dominant with every passing season. The pyramid builders knew the secret of the ramp. They knew that patience conquers height. They knew that steady effort overcomes obstacles that seem insurmountable. They knew that the way up is not always dramatic or exciting. Sometimes it is simply a long, gentle walk, taken one step at a time. Take that walk now. Feel the ramp beneath your feet. Feel the gentle rise, the steady ascent, the slow but certain progress toward the summit. The top is closer than you think. The rest you seek is waiting there, patient and welcoming, ready to receive you. The ramps are quiet now. The workers have gone home. The sledges rest at the bottom, waiting for tomorrow. Only the pyramid remains, rising against the stars, a testament to what patience and persistence can achieve. And you, climbing your own gentle slope, rising through the darkness toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the quiet summit of the night. Rest now. The ramp knows the way. Trust it to carry you. Trust the slow, steady rise. Trust the ancient wisdom of the slope, the simple magic of the incline, the patient power of one step following another. The pyramid waits at the top, and so does sleep. Both are eternal. Both are patient. Both will welcome you when you arrive. Climb gently. Breathe slowly. The summit is near, and the night is soft and warm and full of stars. We have spent much time among the stones. We have watched them quarried and transported, lifted and placed. We have marveled at the tools and techniques, the ramps and sledges, the patient ingenuity that made the impossible possible. But the pyramids were not built by tools. They were not built by techniques or methods or engineering principles. They were built by people, ordinary people with ordinary lives, who woke each morning, ate their breakfast, walked to work, and returned home each evening to their families. Tonight, we leave the construction site behind. We walk away from the rising pyramid, away from the dust and noise and endless labor, and we enter a quieter place. A place of small houses and narrow streets, of cooking fires and sleeping children, of laughter and argument and all the small dramas of daily life. The workers' village. For decades, historians assumed that the pyramid builders lived in temporary camps, rough shelters thrown up for the duration of the project, abandoned when the work was done. The workers were thought to be slaves or conscripts, housed in squalid conditions, given just enough food and rest to keep them functioning. But then, in 1990, archaeologists made a remarkable discovery. Just south of the Great Sphinx, buried beneath centuries of sand and debris, they found an entire city, a planned community, carefully laid out, with streets and houses and bakeries and breweries, and everything else a thriving town might need. This was the workers' village of Giza, and what it revealed changed everything we thought we knew about the pyramid builders. The village was not a temporary camp. It was a permanent settlement, built to last, designed to house thousands of workers and their families for the decades required to complete the pyramid. The houses were made of mud brick, the same material used throughout Egypt for ordinary dwellings, with thick walls to keep out the heat, and flat roofs where families could sleep on warm summer nights. The layout was orderly, almost modern in its planning. Long rectangular galleries housed the rotating crews of laborers, farmers who came to work during the flood season, returning home when the agricultural work resumed. These galleries were divided into sections, each section housing perhaps 40 or 50 men, with shared sleeping areas and communal facilities. But there were also individual houses, smaller dwellings, arranged in neighborhoods where the permanent workforce lived, the skilled craftsmen, the overseers, the administrators who kept the project running year after year. These houses had multiple rooms, some with private courtyards, some with storage areas for grain and personal possessions. The village had streets, real streets, planned and maintained, allowing for the movement of people and goods. It had a drainage system, with channels to carry away wastewater. It had public buildings for administration and storage. It had everything a community needs to function. And it had bakeries. The bakeries of the workers' village were industrial operations. They produced bread not for a family or a neighborhood, but for thousands of workers, day after day, year after year. Archaeologists have found the remains of these bakeries, the ovens, the molds, the storage bins, and have calculated that they could produce hundreds of loaves per day. Bread was the foundation of the Egyptian diet. Workers received daily rations of bread as part of their compensation, not money, which did not exist in the modern sense, but actual loaves, tangible and nourishing. The quality and quantity of these loaves varied by rank and position, but everyone received something. No one went hungry. The bread was made from emmer wheat, a hardy grain that grew well in the Egyptian climate. The wheat was ground into flour using stone querns, a laborious process, usually performed by women, that produced a coarse but nutritious meal. This flour was mixed with water and sometimes flavored with dates or honey, then shaped and baked in clay molds. The resulting loaves were dense and hearty, quite different from the light, fluffy bread we know today. They would have been chewy, substantial filling, exactly what a worker needed to fuel a long day of physical labor. And they would have been fresh, baked daily, delivered warm from the ovens to the hungry crews. Beside the bakeries stood the breweries. Beer was not a luxury in ancient Egypt. It was a necessity. The brewing process killed harmful bacteria in the water, making beer safer to drink than unprocessed Nile water. Beer provided calories, hydration, and essential nutrients. It was given to workers as part of their daily rations, alongside bread. Egyptian beer was thick and nutritious, more like a liquid bread than the clear, carbonated beverages we drink today. It was made from partially baked barley bread, crumbled and mixed with water, then left to ferment. The result was a slightly sweet, mildly alcoholic drink that provided sustenance as well as refreshment. Workers received beer rations every day, sometimes several liters per person. This was not an invitation to drunkenness, but a practical measure to keep the workforce hydrated and nourished. The alcohol content was relatively low, and the beer was consumed throughout the day, with meals and during rest breaks, as a normal part of the working routine. The breweries of the workers' village operated continuously, producing vast quantities of beer to meet the daily demand. Like the bakeries, they were staffed by skilled workers who understood the chemistry of fermentation. Even if they did not have scientific names for what they did, they knew which ingredients to use, how long to let the mixture ferment. When the beer was ready for consumption, beyond bread and beer, the workers' diet included other foods as well. Onions and garlic were staples, providing flavor and nutrition. Vegetables like lettuce, cucumbers, and beans supplemented the grain-based diet. Fish from the Nile was available, either fresh or dried. Meat was rarer, reserved for special occasions or distributed to workers as rewards for exceptional performance. The evidence for this varied diet comes from multiple sources. Archaeologists have found animal bones at the village site, the remains of cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, slaughtered and butchered for consumption. They have found fish bones and scales. They have found the seeds and remnants of vegetables and fruits. The workers' village was more than a place to sleep and eat. It was a community, with all the complexity that implies. People fell in love here, married, raised children. They argued with their neighbors, celebrated festivals, mourned their dead. They formed friendships that lasted lifetimes and rivalries that simmered for years. Archaeologists have found evidence of all these human experiences in the village remains. They have found the graves of workers, some buried with simple grave goods, others with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They have found amulets and jewelry, small personal items that workers treasured and kept close. They have found graffiti, names and messages scratched into walls, the ancient equivalent of carving initials into a tree. One of the most touching discoveries has been the evidence of medical care. The workers' village had its own physicians, trained in the Egyptian medical tradition, ready to treat injuries and illnesses. Archaeologists have found skeletons showing healed fractures, broken bones that were set and splinted, that mended properly because someone took the time to treat them. This is not what we would expect if the pyramid builders were slaves, treated as disposable labor. Slaves do not receive medical care. Slaves do not have their broken bones set. Slaves are worked until they die and then replaced. The workers of Giza were valued. Their health mattered. Their well-being was a concern of the project's administrators. When they were injured, they were treated. When they recovered, they returned to work. This was not generosity, it was practicality. Training a skilled worker took time and resources. Keeping existing workers healthy was more efficient than constantly recruiting and training new ones. But practicality and humanity are not mutually exclusive. The evidence suggests that the workers' village was, by the standards of its time, a good place to live. The food was adequate. The housing was solid. Medical care was available. The work was hard, certainly, but it was not the unrelenting brutality of popular imagination. The village is quiet now. The fires are dying down to embers. The conversations have faded into murmurs, then silence. The children are asleep. The workers are asleep. Even the dogs have stopped their occasional barking and curled up in their patches of dust. Only the stars are awake, wheeling slowly overhead. The same stars that watched over the village 5,000 years ago. The same stars that will watch over the pyramids for thousands of years to come. You are part of this continuity. You are connected to those ancient workers by the simple act of being human, of needing rest, of surrendering to sleep at the end of a long day. They understood this feeling. They knew this moment. They laid down on their sleeping mats, just as you lie down now, and they let the darkness take them. The village sleeps. The pyramid waits. And you, gentle listener, join them in the quiet peace of the night. Rest now. Dream of small houses and narrow streets, of bread fresh from the oven and beer cool from the jar. Dream of community and companionship, of ordinary lives lived in the shadow of extraordinary achievements. The workers' village welcomes you. Its simple comforts are yours tonight. Its ancient peace surrounds you, and its timeless lesson whispers in the darkness. Even the builders of pyramids needed rest. So rest, sleep deeply, and know that tomorrow, like the ancient workers before you, you will rise again, ready for whatever labors the day may bring. But that is tomorrow. Tonight, there is only this, the quiet village, the dying fires, the soft embrace of sleep. We have walked through the workers' village. We have seen the small houses, the narrow streets, the bakeries and breweries that kept the community fed. But now, let us linger a while longer on the subject of food. For food is not merely fuel. Food is comfort. Food is culture. Food is the daily ritual that gives shape to our lives and meaning to our labor. The pyramid builders ate well. This simple fact surprises many people. We imagine ancient laborers as starving wretches, given the barest minimum to keep them alive, work to exhaustion on empty stomachs. But the evidence from Giza tells a different story. The workers who built the pyramids received generous rations, enough not merely to survive but to thrive, to maintain the strength and stamina required for one of the most demanding construction projects in human history. Tonight, let us sit down to a meal with these ancient workers. Let us taste what they tasted, smell what they smelled, understand through the simple act of eating what it meant to be part of this extraordinary endeavor. For in the bread they broke and the beer they drank, we find another piece of the pyramid secret, the understanding that great work requires great nourishment, and that the body must be fed if the spirit is to endure. Bread was the foundation of everything. The Egyptians called bread ta, and it appeared in almost every meal, at every level of society, from the poorest peasant to the pharaoh himself. But the bread of the pyramid builders was not the light, airy loaves we know today. It was dense and heavy, made from coarsely ground emmer wheat, full of texture and substance. Emmer wheat was one of the earliest domesticated grains, cultivated in the ancient Near East for thousands of years before the pyramids were built. It grew well in the Egyptian climate, tolerating the heat and thriving in the rich soil left by the annual floods. The kernels were tough, requiring considerable effort to process, but the resulting flour was nutritious and flavorful. The grinding was done by hand, using stone querns, a flat base stone, and a smaller grinding stone that was pushed back and forth across the grain. This was women's work, typically performed in the early morning hours before the heat of the day made such labor unbearable. The rhythmic scraping of stone on stone was one of the constant sounds of village life, as familiar as birdsong or the lowing of cattle. The grinding process was never perfect. Small fragments of stone would inevitably mix with the flour, invisible but present, wearing down the teeth of anyone who ate the bread over many years. Archaeologists examining the skulls of ancient Egyptians often find severely worn teeth, not from decay, but from this constant abrasion, the unavoidable consequence of a grain-based diet processed with stone tools. Once the flour was ground, the bread-making could begin. The simplest breads were unleavened, just flour and water, mixed into a dough and baked on hot stones or in clay molds. These flatbreads were quick to make and easy to transport, perfect for workers who needed to eat on the go. But the Egyptians also made leavened bread, using natural yeasts captured from the air or preserved from previous batches of dough. A portion of risen dough would be saved and added to the next batch, providing the living yeast cultures needed to make the bread rise. This sourdough technique produced loaves that were lighter and more flavorful than unleavened bread, though still far denser than modern yeast breads. The baking was done in clay ovens, beehive-shaped structures heated by wood or charcoal fires. The bread was placed inside on flat stones or in conical molds, then left to bake until golden brown. The smell of fresh bread wafting from the village bakeries must have been wonderful, that universal, comforting aroma that transcends time and culture, that makes any place feel like home. Workers received bread as part of their daily rations. The amount varied by rank and position. Overseers received more than common laborers, skilled craftsmen more than unskilled workers, but everyone received something. The bread was distributed each morning, enough for the day's meals, supplemented by other foods as available. And alongside the bread, always, came the beer. Egyptian beer was unlike any beer you have tasted. Forget the clear, golden, carbonated beverages of modern breweries. Egyptian beer was thick, cloudy, nutritious, more like a liquid porridge than a refreshing drink. It was made from bread, essentially, barley bread that was partially baked, then crumbled into water and left to ferment. The fermentation process converted the starches in the bread into sugars, and the sugars into alcohol. But the alcohol content was relatively low, perhaps 2 to 4%, similar to a light modern beer. This was not a drink for getting drunk. It was a drink for staying alive. Beer provided hydration in a climate where clean water was not always available. The fermentation process killed harmful bacteria, making beer safer to drink than untreated Nile water. Beer provided calories, significant calories, from the residual sugars and starches that remained after fermentation. Beer provided B vitamins and other nutrients, essential for maintaining health and energy. Workers received beer rations every day, sometimes multiple times a day. A typical worker might consume 2 to 4 liters of beer daily, an amount that sounds excessive until you remember the nature of their work. Hauling stone in the Egyptian heat, sweating profusely under the relentless sun, losing water and salt and energy with every passing hour. These workers needed every calorie they could get. The beer was served in clay cups, passed around during rest breaks, consumed with meals. It was slightly sweet, slightly sour, thick enough to leave a residue on the lips. It was not elegant, It was not sophisticated, but it was essential, as fundamental to the pyramid project as the ropes and sledges and copper chisels. But bread and beer were not the whole story. The workers' diet was supplemented by a variety of other foods, each contributing its own essential nutrients to the daily ration. Onions were perhaps the most important supplement. The humble onion, so common, so ordinary, so easy to overlook, was a staple of the Egyptian diet at every level of society. Onions were cheap to grow, easy to store, and packed with flavor and nutrition. They could be eaten raw, adding a sharp bite to a meal of bland bread. They could be cooked, softening into sweet, caramelized morsels. They could be preserved, lasting for months in a cool, dry place. The workers ate onions every day. The evidence is everywhere, in the piles of onion skins found at archaeological sites, in the artistic depictions of workers carrying bundles of onions, in the written records that list onion rations alongside bread and beer. Some estimates suggest that onions made up a significant portion of the workers' caloric intake, second only to grain. Garlic was equally important. Like onions, garlic was easy to grow and store, full of flavor and believed to have medicinal properties. The Egyptians thought garlic promoted strength and endurance, not an unreasonable belief, given its actual nutritional content. Workers received garlic rations regularly, and the smell of garlic must have permeated the construction site, mingling with the dust and sweat and the ever-present scent of the Nile. Together, bread, beer, onions, and garlic formed the core of the workers' diet. This may sound monotonous to modern ears, the same foods, day after day, week after week, year after year. But the Egyptians did not share our obsession with variety. They valued reliability, consistency, sufficiency. They wanted to know that food would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. The sameness was not a burden, but a comfort. The pyramid rises in the distance, dark against the evening sky. Tomorrow you will return to its ramps and platforms, to the endless labor of moving stone. But tonight, there is only this: the food in your belly, the company of friends, the slow settling of a tired body into rest. The meal is finished. The cups are empty. The conversation fades into comfortable silence. One by one, the workers rise and make their way to their sleeping mats, ready for the deep sleep that comes after hard work and good food. You go with them. You lie down in the darkness, feeling the fullness in your stomach, the heaviness in your limbs. The bread and beer have done their work. Your body is nourished, your energy replenished, your strength restored. Sleep comes easily after such a meal. It always does. The body knows what it needs, and when those needs are met, it surrenders gratefully to rest. So surrender now. Let the ancient meal settle within you, warm and comforting. Let the simplicity of bread and beer and onions quiet your modern mind. Let the timeless rhythm of eating and sleeping carry you gently into the night. The workers' village is quiet. The cooking fires have died to embers. The smell of bread and garlic lingers in the still air, mingling with the dust and the distant scent of the river. And you, nourished by the same simple foods that built the pyramids, drift peacefully toward dreams. Rest now. Your belly is full. Your work is done. The night is soft and dark and welcoming. Sleep deeply, as the pyramid builders slept, and know that tomorrow, like them, you will rise again, ready to face whatever the day may bring, strengthened by the simple, eternal gifts of bread and beer and rest. We have spoken of tools and techniques, of ramps and sledges, of bread and beer. We have described the systems and methods that made the pyramids possible. But systems do not lift stones. Methods do not shape granite. Only hands can do that. Human hands, attached to human bodies, guided by human minds and hearts. Tonight, let us turn our attention to the workers themselves, not as anonymous masses, not as faceless labor, but as individuals. Men with names and families, with hopes and fears, with stories that deserve to be remembered even if most of them have been lost to time. Who were these people who built the pyramids? Where did they come from? What motivated them to spend years of their lives hauling stone in the desert heat? And what did they think about in the quiet moments between one block and the next, as they slowly raised a monument that would outlast everything they knew? These questions do not have easy answers. The workers left few records of their own thoughts and feelings. They were not scribes or priests, trained in the art of writing. They were ordinary people, and ordinary people in ancient Egypt, as in most times and places, left little trace of their inner lives. But we can piece together a portrait from the evidence that remains, and what emerges is not the image of slaves or prisoners, but of proud workers, skilled craftsmen, and dedicated laborers who believed in what they were building. The first thing to understand is that the pyramid builders were not slaves. This myth has persisted for centuries, fueled by biblical stories of Hebrew bondage in Egypt and by Hollywood spectacles showing whip-wielding overseers driving chained prisoners through the desert. It is a powerful image, dramatic and morally clear, but it is almost certainly wrong. The evidence from Giza tells a different story. The workers' village we explored earlier was not a prison camp. It was a community, with homes and families, bakeries and breweries, medical care and organized provisioning. The workers were fed well, housed adequately, and treated with a degree of respect that would have been unthinkable for slaves. More importantly, the work itself required skill. Moving and placing multi-ton blocks with millimeter precision is not a task that can be accomplished by unwilling laborers under the lash. It requires cooperation, coordination, pride in workmanship. It requires workers who care about the quality of their work, who take satisfaction in a job well done. Slaves do not care about quality. Slaves do the minimum required to avoid punishment, and no more. The pyramids could not have been built by slaves, because the pyramids required something that slavery cannot produce: dedication. So if not slaves, then who? The core workforce consisted of farmers. This makes perfect sense when you understand the rhythm of Egyptian life. For several months each year, during the inundation, the Nile's floodwaters covered the agricultural land. Farming was impossible. The peasants who worked the fields had nothing to do but wait for the waters to recede. The pharaoh's government put this idle labor to use. Farmers were conscripted to work on royal construction projects during the flood season, not as punishment, but as a form of taxation. They owed labor to the state, just as they owed a portion of their harvest. Working on the pyramid was how they paid their debt. This system, called corvée labor, was common throughout the ancient world. It was not pleasant. No one enjoys being conscripted, but it was not slavery either. The workers retained their freedom. They had homes to return to when the work was done. They were not bought and sold, not branded or chained, not treated as property. And there were compensations. The workers received food and housing during their service. They received the satisfaction of contributing to a great national project. They received, perhaps, a sense of connection to something larger than their small village lives, something that would endure long after they were gone. Many workers came back year after year. The records suggest that some men spent decades working on the pyramids, returning each flood season to take up their familiar tasks. They formed teams, developed expertise, rose through the ranks from common laborer to foreman to overseer. The pyramid became a second career, a second identity, a second home. Beyond the seasonal farmers, there was a permanent workforce of skilled craftsmen. These were not conscripts, but professionals, men who had trained for years in specialized trades, who worked on the pyramid year-round, who lived permanently in the workers' village with their families. Stonecutters and masons, carpenters and rope makers, surveyors and engineers, the skilled trades that kept a project moving forward regardless of the season. These craftsmen were the aristocracy of the workforce. They received larger rations, better housing, more respect. Their skills were rare and valuable, not easily replaced. A master stonecutter who could shape granite with precision was worth his weight in gold, or at least in bread and beer. The skills were passed down through families. A father would teach his son, who would teach his son in turn. Dynasties of craftsmen emerged, families whose names became synonymous with particular trades. The pyramid was built not just by individuals, but by lineages, chains of knowledge and skills stretching back generations and forward into the future. We know some of their names. Archaeologists have found inscriptions identifying work gangs and their leaders: the Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkaure, the Vigorous Gang, the Enduring Gang. These were not official titles, but nicknames, team names, expressions of identity and pride. The gangs competed with each other. Which team could move the most blocks? Which could achieve the finest finish? Which could complete their section first? This competition was encouraged by the overseers, who understood that rivalry breeds effort. The gangs took pride in their work, in their reputation, in their position relative to other teams. But what motivated these workers, beyond rations and rivalry? What made them willing to spend years of their lives in such demanding labor? Part of the answer is religious. The workers believed in what they were building. They believed that the pharaoh was a living god, that a successful journey to the afterlife was essential for the continued prosperity of Egypt, that the pyramid was a sacred structure that would benefit everyone, not just the king, who would be buried within it. This belief was not blind faith imposed from above. It was woven into the fabric of Egyptian culture, as natural and unquestioned as the rising of the sun or the flooding of the Nile. The workers were not building a monument to oppression. They were building a cosmic machine, a device that would ensure the eternal order of the universe. Their labor was not exploitation, but participation in something sacred. There was also civic pride. The pyramid was a national project, the greatest undertaking of its age. To work on it was to be part of history, to contribute to something that would be remembered forever. The workers knew that their names might be forgotten, but their work would endure. Every stone they placed was a vote for permanence, a small piece of immortality. And there was simple human satisfaction, the pleasure of skilled work well done, the camaraderie of shared effort, the sense of accomplishment that comes from seeing something grow under your hands, day by day, year by year. The pyramid builders could look at their work and see their progress. They could point to a particular block and say, "I placed that one." They could watch the monument rise and know that they had raised it. This is a satisfaction that many modern workers never experience. We labor in offices and factories, producing intangible results, contributing to processes we barely understand. The pyramid builders had something we often lack, the ability to see the fruits of their labor, to touch the stones they had placed, to stand in the shadow of their own achievement. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carry that faith with you. Know that your efforts matter, even the small ones, even the ones no one sees. Know that you are building something, even if you cannot name it or see its shape. Know that the hands that shaped the pyramids were no different from your own. Human hands, capable of great things, worthy of rest. The workers' village is quiet now. The gangs have disbanded for the night. The rivalries are set aside until tomorrow. The names painted on hidden stones sleep in darkness, waiting to be discovered by generations not yet born. And the pyramid stands, silent and eternal, a testament to all those unnamed hands. Let your own hands rest now. They have done enough for today. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new contributions, new stones to place in the edifice of your life. But tonight, there is only sleep. Deep, peaceful, restorative sleep. The sleep of workers who have earned their rest, who have given their effort, who can close their eyes knowing that they have done their part. Rest now as they rested. Dream as they dreamed. And know that you are part of the same great human project that has been unfolding since the first stone was placed on the Giza Plateau so many centuries ago. The hands that shaped eternity are your hands, too, and they deserve, tonight, the gentle gift of sleep. We have spoken of the workers and their tools, their food and their villages. We have watched the stones move from quarry to pyramid, lifted by ramps and human effort. But there is a question we have not yet addressed, a mystery that seems almost as profound as the physical labor itself. How did they know where to put the stones? The Great Pyramid is not a random pile of blocks. It is a precisely engineered structure, aligned to the cardinal directions with astonishing accuracy. Its base level to within a few centimeters across hundreds of meters, its angles consistent from bottom to top. Every stone had a specific place, a designated position in the overall design. Nothing was left to chance. Yet the pyramid builders had no blueprints, no paper, no drafting tables, no architectural drawings in the modern sense, no CAD software or computer models or detailed construction documents. They had none of the tools we consider essential for managing a complex construction project. What they had instead was memory, tradition, knowledge passed down through generations of builders. stored not on paper, but in human minds. And they had rope. Tonight, let us explore this remarkable system of planning and measurement. Let us understand how an entire civilization built monuments of impossible precision, using nothing more than stretched cords, wooden rods, and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The Egyptians did have some written records relating to construction. Papyrus scrolls have been found containing mathematical problems, geometric calculations, lists of materials and workers. But these documents are sparse, fragmentary, far less detailed than we would expect for projects of such complexity. The reason is simple. Most of the knowledge did not need to be written down. It lived in the minds of the master builders, passed from teacher to student through years of apprenticeship and practice. Writing was laborious and expensive in ancient Egypt. Papyrus was valuable. Why write down what everyone already knew? This oral tradition is difficult for us to appreciate. We live in a world of documentation, where knowledge is stored externally, in books and databases and cloud servers. We assume that important information must be recorded somewhere. That complexity requires written records. But human memory is far more capable than we often give it credit for. Skilled practitioners in many traditional crafts carry vast stores of knowledge in their heads, recipes and techniques, proportions and procedures, subtle judgments that cannot easily be reduced to words on a page. The pyramid builders were such practitioners, masters of a craft so deeply internalized that it did not need to be written. The foundation of this craft was mathematics, not the abstract mathematics of modern academia, but practical mathematics, geometry, and arithmetic applied to real-world problems. The Egyptians were skilled calculators, capable of handling fractions, computing areas and volumes, solving problems that would challenge many people today. The basic unit of measurement was the cubit, the length from a man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger. This sounds imprecise, but the Egyptians standardized it carefully. The royal cubit, used for official construction projects, was defined as exactly 7 palms, or 28 fingers. Physical cubit rods, made of wood or stone, preserved this standard measurement and could be copied and distributed throughout the kingdom. A cubit rod was more than a simple measuring stick. It was a precision instrument, carefully calibrated, marked with subdivisions down to individual fingers and even smaller fractions. Master builders carried their cubit rods as badges of office, symbols of their skill and authority. The rods were treated with respect, stored carefully, protected from damage. With a cubit rod, a builder could measure lengths precisely. But measuring lengths is only part of the challenge. To construct a pyramid, you also need to establish straight lines, right angles, level surfaces, and consistent slopes. You need to transfer measurements from one place to another to ensure that work done at different locations will fit together perfectly when combined. For all of this, the Egyptians used rope. Rope stretching was one of the fundamental techniques of Egyptian construction. A rope of known length, pulled taut between 2 points, creates a perfectly straight line. 2 ropes of equal length, stretched from a common point to 2 other points, can establish equal distances. 3 ropes, with lengths in specific ratios, can create perfect right angles. The technique for creating right angles was elegant and simple. Take 3 ropes, with lengths in the ratio 3 to 4 to 5. Stretch them to form a triangle, with each rope forming one side. The angle opposite the longest side will be exactly 90 degrees, a perfect right angle. This is the Pythagorean theorem in action. Though the Egyptians used it 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born, they may not have understood why it worked in theoretical terms, but they knew that it worked, and that was enough. The 3-4-5 triangle became one of the fundamental tools of Egyptian construction, used to establish the corners of buildings, the angles of walls, the orientation of entire monuments. The surveyors who performed this work were called rope stretchers, and they were highly respected professionals. Their skill was essential to every construction project, from humble houses to the greatest pyramids. Without accurate surveying, nothing else could proceed. The rope stretchers were the first workers on any site, establishing the lines and angles that all subsequent work would follow. At Giza, the rope stretchers faced an extraordinary challenge. The base of the Great Pyramid covers more than 13 acres. Each side is over 230 meters long. The corners needed to be precisely 90 degrees, the sides exactly equal in length, the entire structure aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. How did they achieve such accuracy? Part of the answer lies in careful observation of the sky. The Egyptians were skilled astronomers, tracking the movements of stars with great precision. They knew that certain stars rose and set at specific points on the horizon, and they could use these celestial markers to establish true north. One method involved observing a star as it rose in the east and again as it set in the west. The midpoint between these two positions indicated true north. Another method involved watching the circumpolar stars, stars that never set but circle endlessly around the celestial pole, and using their positions to calculate the exact direction of north. These astronomical observations were combined with ground-based surveying to establish the pyramid's orientation. The results were remarkable. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an error of less than 1/20th of a degree, a precision that was not matched in the Western world until the modern era. But alignment was only the beginning. The surveyors also needed to ensure that the foundation was perfectly level. A pyramid with an uneven base would lean, its courses would not match properly, and the entire structure would be unstable. Leveling over such a large area was achieved through the use of water. The Egyptians would dig a network of shallow trenches across the construction site and fill them with water. Since water always seeks its own level, the surface of the water in connected trenches would be exactly horizontal, regardless of variations in the ground beneath. By measuring down from this water surface to the bedrock, the surveyors could determine exactly how much material needed to be removed from each area to create a perfectly level foundation. The process was laborious, digging trenches, filling them with water, taking measurements, draining and filling again, but it worked. The foundation of the Great Pyramid is level to within 2.1 centimeters across its entire extent. Once the foundation was prepared, the actual construction could begin. But the surveying work did not stop. At every stage, measurements were taken, alignments were checked, adjustments were made. The rope stretchers worked continuously throughout the project, ensuring that each course of stones was level, that each corner remained true, that the pyramid rose exactly as planned. The slope of the pyramid sides, its angle of incline, was controlled through a concept the Egyptians called sect. The sect was essentially a ratio, expressing how much the pyramid face moved inward for each unit of height. A sect of 5.5, for example, meant that for every cubit of height, the face moved inward by 5.5 palms. This sect was established at the beginning of the project and maintained throughout. Workers used simple wooden tools called boning rods, straight sticks of equal length, to check that each course maintained the correct slope. By sighting along the boning rods, they could detect any deviation from the planned angle and make corrections before proceeding further. The system was self-correcting. Errors made at one stage would be caught and fixed at the next. The constant checking and rechecking meant that small mistakes did not accumulate into large ones. The pyramid rose true because it was never allowed to drift far from true. All of this was accomplished without written blueprints. The overall design existed in the minds of the master builders. The specific measurements and proportions were established at the start and maintained through continuous verification. The knowledge of how to perform each task was carried by skilled workers who had learned their craft through years of practice. This system required trust. Trust in the master builders who held the design in their heads. Trust in the surveyors who established the lines and angles. Trust in the workers who performed each task according to tradition. Trust in the accumulated wisdom of generations. It also required communication. The master builders could not simply hand out copies of the plans. They had to explain, demonstrate, supervise. They had to ensure that every worker understood their role, that every team knew what was expected. They had to maintain consistency across thousands of workers. Over decades of construction, the foremen and scribes played a crucial role in this communication. They were the intermediate layer between the master builders and the common workers, translating high-level plans into specific instructions, tracking progress, reporting problems. The pyramid was built not just by muscle but by management, by the careful coordination of countless individual efforts toward a common goal. And at the center of it all was memory. human memory, fallible and limited, yet capable of holding vast stores of knowledge when properly trained and organized. The master builders remembered designs they had studied as young apprentices. The surveyors remembered techniques they had practiced for decades. The workers remembered procedures they had performed thousands of times. This memory was reinforced by ritual and repetition. The same tasks were performed in the same way, day after day, year after year. The same chants were sung, the same procedures followed, the same checks applied. The pyramid was built not through innovation, but through faithful repetition of proven methods. There is wisdom in this approach. Innovation is valuable, but it is also risky. We have walked among the workers, watched them lift and pull and strain. We have seen the surveyors stretch their ropes and the master builders hold their plans in memory. But there is another group we have not yet met, a quieter group, less visible but no less essential, the foremen and scribes. These were the men who kept the pyramid project running, not through physical labor. They rarely lifted stones themselves, but through organization, coordination, and the patient work of administration. They counted and recorded, planned and scheduled, solved problems and settled disputes. They were the connective tissue of the workforce, the nervous system that transmitted instructions from the top to the bottom and information from the bottom to the top. Without them, the pyramid could not have been built. 10,000 workers pulling in 10,000 different directions would accomplish nothing. The foremen and scribes ensured that everyone pulled together, that effort was coordinated, that resources were allocated where they were needed. They transformed chaos into order, potential into achievement. Tonight, let's spend some time with these quiet organizers. Let us watch them at their work, see their tools and methods, understand how they managed one of the largest and most complex construction projects in human history. For in their patient record-keeping and careful supervision, we find another piece of the pyramid secret. The foremen were the frontline supervisors of the pyramid project. Each foreman was responsible for a team of workers, perhaps 20 or 30 men, and for ensuring that their assigned tasks were completed properly and on time. The foreman knew each of his workers by name, understood their strengths and weaknesses, and assigned tasks accordingly. A good foreman was not a tyrant. The evidence suggests that Egyptian foremen led through respect rather than fear. They worked alongside their men, demonstrated techniques, solved problems, and advocated for their teams when dealing with higher authorities. The relationship between foreman and worker was often close, built on years of working together, season after season, on the same great project. The foreman's authority was symbolized by his staff, a long wooden rod that served both as a practical tool and as a badge of office. With a staff, a foreman could point, gesture, mark locations, and, if necessary, provide gentle correction to a worker who was not performing adequately. But the staff was rarely used for punishment. Egyptian labor management relied more on incentives than on force. Teams that performed well received rewards, extra rations, recognition, perhaps a day of rest. Teams that fell behind received encouragement and assistance, not beatings. The goal was to complete the pyramid, and that goal was best served by workers who were motivated rather than terrorized. Above the foreman were the overseers, senior managers responsible for larger sections of the work. An overseer might supervise 10 or 20 foremen, coordinating their efforts, allocating resources, and ensuring that different teams worked together effectively. The overseers reported to the master builders and received instructions from them, translating broad plans into specific assignments. The hierarchy was clear but not rigid. Information flowed both up and down. A foreman who noticed a problem would report it to his overseer, who would report it to the master builder, who would determine a solution. The solution would then flow back down the chain, modified and interpreted at each level to suit local conditions. This kind of hierarchical management is so familiar to us today that we take it for granted. But it was not inevitable. It was an invention, a technology as important as the sledge or the ramp. The Egyptians developed sophisticated management structures that allowed them to coordinate thousands of workers across decades of construction. Without this organizational technology, the physical technology would have been useless. And at the heart of this organization were the scribes. The scribes were the record keepers of ancient Egypt. They could read and write, skills that only a small fraction of the population possessed, and they used these skills to create the documentation that kept the state functioning. Tax records, legal documents, religious texts, administrative correspondence. All of this flowed through the hands of the scribes. In the Pyramid Project, scribes performed essential functions. They recorded the arrival and departure of workers, tracking who was present and who was absent. They tallied the rations distributed. So many loaves of bread, so many jars of beer, so many bundles of onions, ensuring that the supplies matched the workforce. They noted the progress of construction. How many blocks were placed each day? How far the ramps had been extended? What problems had arisen and how they had been solved? These records served multiple purposes. They provided accountability, ensuring that resources were not wasted or stolen. They provided information for planning, allowing the master builders to adjust their schedules and allocations based on actual progress. And they provided a historical record, documenting the great project for posterity. Some of these records have survived. The Diary of Mirror, discovered in 2013, is a papyrus log kept by an inspector who oversaw teams transporting limestone to Giza during the reign of Khufu. The diary records daily activities, moving stones, waiting for deliveries, dealing with delays. It is mundane, even boring, exactly the kind of routine documentation that keeps a large project running. But in its mundanity lies its value. The Diary of Mirror shows us how the pyramid was built not through miracles, but through management. It shows teams working regular schedules, following established procedures, dealing with ordinary problems in ordinary ways. It strips away the mystery and reveals the reality, a well-organized construction project, run by competent administrators, achieving extraordinary results through methodical effort. The scribes' tools were simple but effective. They wrote with reed pens, cut from the papyrus plant that grew abundantly along the Nile. They used two colors of ink, black for ordinary text, red for headings, emphasis, and corrections. They wrote on papyrus for important documents and on ostraca, broken pottery shards, for everyday notes and calculations. The script they used was hieratic, a simplified form of hieroglyphics designed for rapid writing. Hieratic could be written much faster than the elaborate pictorial hieroglyphics used for monumental inscriptions, making it practical for administrative purposes. A skilled scribe could take dictation, recording speech almost as fast as it was spoken. Becoming a scribe required years of training. Boys from respectable families would be apprenticed to established scribes, learning first to read and then to write, memorizing the hundreds of signs needed for competent literacy, practicing their penmanship until it met the exacting standards of their profession. The training was rigorous, but the rewards were substantial. Scribes enjoyed high status, comfortable lives, and the satisfaction of essential work. The scribes were proud of their profession. Ancient Egyptian texts praised the scribe's life, contrasting it favorably with the hard labor of farmers, craftsmen, and soldiers. Be a scribe. One text advises, so that your limbs may be sleek and your hands soft, and you may go forth in white attire, honored, with courtiers saluting you. This pride was not misplaced. The scribes were the memory of Egyptian civilization. Without their records, the state could not function. Without their literacy, knowledge could not be preserved across generations. The pyramids themselves would have been impossible without the organizational capacity that the scribes provided. The relationship between physical labor and administration is sometimes seen as antagonistic. We speak of workers and management as if they were natural enemies, their interests fundamentally opposed. But on the Pyramid Project, this opposition did not exist in the same way. The foremen and scribes were not parasites feeding on the workers' labor. They were essential contributors, without whom the labor would have been wasted. Consider what would happen without organization. Blocks would be quarried but not transported. Stone would arrive at the wrong locations. Workers would show up without tasks assigned or tools provided. Rations would be distributed unevenly or not at all. The construction would stall, not from lack of effort but from lack of coordination. The foremen and scribes prevented this chaos. They ensured that every block had a destination, every worker had a task, every team had the resources it needed. They were the invisible infrastructure of the project, as essential as the ramps and sledges, if less dramatic. and they did their work quietly. The foremen did not seek glory. Their satisfaction came from seeing their team succeed. The scribes did not crave recognition. Their reward was the smooth functioning of the systems they maintained. They were content to work in the background, to enable rather than perform, to organize rather than create. There is nobility in this kind of work, not the flashy nobility of kings and conquerors, but the steady nobility of those who keep things running. The world depends on such people, the administrators and coordinators, the planners and record keepers, the quiet organizers who make complex endeavors possible. The pyramid could not have been built by workers alone, no matter how strong or willing. It could not have been built by planners alone, no matter how brilliant or visionary. It required both, and it required the foremen and scribes who connected them, who translated plans into actions and actions into records, who kept the vast machine of construction running smoothly day after day, year after year, decade after decade. This is perhaps the deepest secret of the pyramids. They were not built by superhuman effort or divine intervention. They were not built by slaves driven by whips or by aliens with advanced technology. They were built by organization, by the patient, unglamorous work of coordination and management, record keeping and supervision. The Egyptians understood something that we sometimes forget. Great achievements require not just individual excellence, but collective coordination. 1,000 brilliant individuals working in isolation will accomplish less than 100 ordinary people working together. The pyramid was built not by heroes, but by teams, not by geniuses, but by systems. And at the heart of those systems were the foremen and scribes, the men who counted and recorded, the men who assigned and supervised, the men who solved problems and prevented confusion, the men who did the quiet, essential work that made everything else possible. As you lie there tonight, perhaps you can appreciate this kind of work in a new way. The world is full of quiet organizers, people who keep things running, who coordinate and facilitate, who enable others to succeed. They rarely receive recognition. Their names are rarely remembered. But without them, nothing would function. You may be one of these people yourself. You may spend your days not in dramatic achievements, but in steady maintenance. Not in creating the new, but in sustaining the existing. If so, know that your work matters. Know that the pyramids could not have been built without people like you. The foremen have gone home for the night. Their staffs are set aside, their responsibilities temporarily suspended. Tomorrow they will return to their posts, ready to guide and supervise, to encourage and correct. But tonight they rest, as everyone rests, as the pyramid itself seems to rest under the silent stars. The scribes have put away their pens. Their ink has dried. Their scrolls have been stored. Their tallies have been completed. The records of the day are safe, preserved for tomorrow, for next year, for millennia yet to come. The scribes have done their part. Now they too surrender to the night, and the organization sleeps. Not the people. The people are sleeping, but the organization itself, the web of relationships and responsibilities, the systems and procedures, the plans and records. It sleeps, ready to wake with the sun, ready to coordinate another day of construction, another small step toward the completed pyramid. You are part of many organizations, family, community, workplace, society. You are connected to others by bonds of responsibility and cooperation, by shared goals and mutual dependence. These connections define your life as much as your individual qualities do. Tonight, let those connections rest. Let the organizations you belong to sleep alongside you. Tomorrow you will resume your roles, fulfill your responsibilities, contribute your part to the collective endeavors that give your life meaning. But tonight, there are no tasks, no obligations, no reports to file or schedules to maintain. Tonight, there is only rest. The quiet rest of the foreman, who has guided his team well. The peaceful rest of the scribe, who has recorded the day's work faithfully. The satisfied rest of everyone who has contributed to something larger than themselves. The pyramid rises in the darkness, a monument to organization as much as to labor. It stands as proof of what coordinated effort can achieve, what patient administration can build, what quiet competence can create. And you, part of your own organizations, connected to your own teams and systems, drift gently toward sleep. The records of your day are complete. The coordination is done. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new challenges, new opportunities to contribute. But tonight, there's only the quiet peace of work well done, of responsibilities fulfilled, of a place in the larger whole. Rest now, quiet organizer. Your work matters more than you know, and the night welcomes you, as it welcomed the foremen and scribes of ancient Egypt, into its soft and restorative embrace. Sleep deeply. Dream of papyrus and ink, of staffs and tallies, of the quiet machinery that builds great things. The pyramid waits. The organization sleeps. And you, at last, can rest. We have spoken of the Nile before, at the very beginning of our journey. We watched its waters rise and fall, saw the black soil it deposited along its banks, understood how its rhythms shaped the lives of everyone who lived within its reach. Now let us return to the river, but with new eyes. Let us see how its annual flood did not merely make the pyramid possible in some abstract sense, but actively shaped the construction schedule, determining when work could proceed and when it must pause, creating a pulse of activity that beat in time with the heartbeat of Egypt itself. The pyramid was not built at a constant pace. It surged and slowed, expanded and contracted, following a rhythm as old as the land itself. And in this rhythm, we find another piece of the ancient wisdom, the understanding that great work must flow with nature, not against it. Tonight, let us follow the pyramid through a single year, watching as the seasons change, as the river rises and falls, as the workforce grows and shrinks in response to forces far beyond human control. For in this seasonal dance, we see how the Egyptians achieved something extraordinary. They turned the flood that interrupted their farming into the very engine that built their monuments. The Egyptian year was divided into 3 seasons, each approximately 4 months long. Ake was the season of inundation, when the floodwaters covered the land. Parate was the season of emergence, when the waters receded and planting began. Shimu was the season of harvest, when the crops were gathered and the land baked dry under the summer sun. These seasons were not merely agricultural categories. They were the organizing principle of Egyptian life, determining everything from religious festivals to government policies, from travel routes to construction schedules. The pyramid project, like everything else in Egypt, had to work within this framework. Ake began in late June or early July, when the distant rains in the Ethiopian highlands sent their waters cascading down toward Egypt. At first, the rise was gradual, almost imperceptible. The river crept higher day by day, filling the irrigation channels, spreading across the lowest-lying fields. Farmers watched anxiously, measuring the rise against their nilometers, hoping for a good flood, high enough to water the land, not so high as to destroy their homes. By August, the flood was in full force. The entire valley was transformed into a vast lake, broken only by villages built on higher ground and by the great monuments that rose above the waters. The fields where crops would soon grow lay submerged under several feet of water, invisible beneath the brown, silt-laden surface. For farmers, this was a time of enforced idleness. There was nothing to do in the fields. The fields were gone, hidden beneath the flood. Some farmers found other work, fishing or crafting or trading, but many found their way to the pyramid. The flood season was the peak of pyramid construction. This seems counterintuitive at first. Why would building activity increase during a time of flooding? But the logic becomes clear when you understand the Egyptian economy. During the flood, tens of thousands of farmers had nothing to do. They were idle, restless, potentially troublesome. The pharaoh's government faced a choice. Let them sit in their flooded villages, consuming stored grain without producing anything new, or put them to work on projects that benefited the state. The corvée system channeled this idle labor toward the pyramid. Farmers were conscripted to work for the pharaoh during the flood months, receiving food and shelter in exchange for their labor. This was not slavery. They retained their freedom, their identity, their right to return home when the work was done, but it was obligatory service, a form of taxation paid in muscle rather than grain. And so the pyramid workforce swelled during Ake. Thousands of new workers arrived from villages throughout Egypt, ready to haul stone and pull ropes. The construction site buzzed with activity, the ramps crowded with sledges, the air filled with the sound of chanting work crews and the constant tap of copper on stone. The work was hard, but the workers had little choice. Their fields were underwater. Their usual livelihood was impossible. The pyramid offered food, shelter, and purpose during a time when they would otherwise have nothing to do. Many workers accepted this bargain willingly, even gratefully. The flood also facilitated transportation. The Nile, swollen with water, could carry heavier loads than at any other time of year. The great granite blocks from Aswan, the fine limestone for the casing stones, the massive architectural elements that required special handling, all of these were preferentially transported during the flood, when the river was high and the boats could navigate with ease. Channels were dug from the Nile to the base of the Giza Plateau, allowing boats to come within a short distance of the construction site. These channels filled with water during the flood, creating temporary harbors where cargo could be unloaded directly onto waiting sledges. When the flood receded, the channels would drain and become impassable, but by then the heavy transport work was done. The logistics were carefully planned. Quarry work at Aswan was scheduled to produce blocks ready for transport, just as the floodwaters reached their peak. Boats were prepared and crews assembled. The blocks were loaded, floated north with the current, unloaded at Giza, and moved immediately into position. The entire supply chain was synchronized to take maximum advantage of the flood. This was not accidental. It was the result of decades of experience, of careful observation and planning, of organizational systems designed to exploit the natural rhythm of the river. The Egyptians did not fight the flood, they used it. They turned an apparent obstacle into an advantage, a disruption into an opportunity. As the months passed, the flood gradually receded. By October or November, the waters had retreated from the fields, leaving behind that precious gift of black silt. The land re-emerged, dark and rich, ready for planting. The season of parade had begun. Now the farmers faced a choice. Some would remain at the pyramid, continuing their work through the planting season. These were often men without families, or men whose families could manage the farm work without them, or men who had developed skills at construction that made them more valuable at the pyramid than in the fields. But most would return home. The planting could not wait. The seeds had to go into the ground while the soil was still moist from the flood, before the sun baked it hard. Every hand was needed in the fields. The survival of the family, the village, the entire nation depended on getting the crops planted in time. And so the pyramid workforce shrank. The great surge of flood season labor ebbed away, as thousands of workers said their farewells and began the journey home. The construction site grew quieter, the ramps less crowded, the pace of work more measured. But the work did not stop. The permanent workforce, the skilled craftsmen, the overseers, the scribes, remained at Giza year-round. The quarrying continued, though at a reduced pace. The ramps were extended, preparing for the next flood season's surge. The organizational work went on, planning and preparing for the months ahead. The pyramid rose more slowly during Parade and Shimu than during Ake, but it still rose. Every day, every week, every month, stones were placed, progress was made. The monument crept closer to completion. The seasonal variation in workforce did not halt the project. It merely modulated it, creating a rhythm of intense activity and steady maintenance. This seasonal rhythm continued for over 20 years. 20 flood seasons, 20 cycles of surge and ebb, 20 repetitions of the ancient pattern. Each year, the pyramid rose a little higher. Each year, the workers returned, took up their familiar tasks, and pushed the monument closer to completion. Some workers came back year after year, decade after decade. The pyramid became a part of their lives, as regular as the planting and harvest. They watched it grow from a foundation to a mountain, from a promise to a reality. They aged alongside it, their hair graying, their muscles weakening, even as the stones continued to rise. Other workers came only once or twice, fulfilling their corvée obligation, and then returning to their farms for good. For these men, the pyramid was an interruption, a few months snatched from their ordinary lives, memorable but not central. They would tell stories to their grandchildren about the summer they helped build the great tomb of the king, but the pyramid was not their life's work. Both experiences were valid. Both contributions were necessary. The pyramid needed the steady expertise of the permanent workers and the seasonal muscle of the conscripted farmers. It needed the continuity of those who came back year after year, and the fresh energy of those who came only once. It was built by a community that itself changed and flowed, like the river that made it possible. There is something profound in this seasonal rhythm. It reminds us that great achievements are not accomplished in a single burst of effort, but through sustained work over time. The pyramid was not built in a month or a year. It was built over a generation, through countless cycles of intense work and patient maintenance. This is how most great things are built, not through heroic sprints, but through steady marathons. Not through single moments of inspiration, but through years of disciplined practice. The flood came and went. The workers came and went, but the work continued, day after day, season after season, until the thing was done. And the rhythm itself was part of the achievement. The Egyptians did not fight against the seasons. They embraced them. They did not try to maintain a constant pace of work regardless of conditions. They adapted their pace to match the conditions. They worked with nature, not against it. And in doing so, they accomplished what might otherwise have been impossible. We often forget this lesson in our modern world. We push for constant productivity, year-round efficiency, the elimination of all variation and downtime. We treat the rhythms of nature as obstacles to be overcome rather than patterns to be followed. But there's wisdom in the seasonal approach. Rest and activity, expansion and contraction, effort and recovery. These alternations are not weaknesses but strengths. They allow for renewal, for reflection, for the integration of experience. They prevent burnout, sustain motivation, and create space for the unconscious work of growth and consolidation. The pyramid was built by people who understood this wisdom. They worked hard when the time was right for hard work. They slowed down when the time was right for slowing down. They followed the flood, not fighting it but flowing with it. And in doing so, they built something eternal. As you lie there tonight, consider your own rhythms, the times of intense activity and the times of rest, the seasons of your life, whatever form they take. Are you fighting against them or flowing with them? Are you trying to maintain a constant pace regardless of conditions? Or are you adapting your pace to match the rhythms that surround you? The flood is a teacher. It shows us that variation is not failure, that rest is not laziness, that the ebb is as important as the surge. The pyramid could not have been built without the flood, and it could not have been built without the periods of reduced activity that followed the flood. Both were necessary. Both contributed to the final achievement. Tonight is a time of rest for you, as the planting season was a time of reduced activity for the pyramid builders. The intense work of your day has receded, like the flood waters pulling back from the fields. Now is the time for recovery, for renewal, for the quiet work of restoration that prepares you for the next surge of activity. Let yourself follow this rhythm. Let yourself ebb after the flood of the day. Let yourself slow down, quiet down, settle into the natural rest that the night provides. The pyramid builders are sleeping in their villages, dreaming of the fields they will plant tomorrow. The permanent workers are sleeping at Giza, dreaming of the stones they will place in the morning. The river is flowing quietly northward, carrying the last of the flood waters toward the sea. And you are here, in your own bed, in your own season, following your own rhythm. The flood of your day has passed. The waters are receding. The time for rest has come. Let it come. Let the seasonal wisdom of ancient Egypt guide you into sleep. Let the rhythm of work and rest, surge and ebb, flood and recession carry you gently through the night. Tomorrow the work will resume. Tomorrow the rhythm will continue. But tonight there's only this, the quiet time between floods, the peaceful season of rest, the soft darkness that restores and renews. Sleep now, as the land sleeps between floods. Dream of rivers and seasons, of rhythms as old as the earth itself. And know that when you wake, the flood will come again, bringing with it the energy and opportunity of a new day. But that is tomorrow. Tonight, the waters are calm, the fields are quiet, and the pyramid waits patiently under the stars. Rest deeply. The rhythm knows the way, and the season of sleep has come at last. Close your eyes now. Not to sleep, not yet, but to listen, to imagine, to hear across the vast distance of time, the sounds that filled the air at Giza 5,000 years ago. We have explored this ancient world through sight and touch, through the weight of stone and the taste of bread. But we have not yet listened. We have not yet tuned our ears to the soundscape of pyramid construction, to the symphony of labor that accompanied every block placed, every ramp climbed, every day of work from dawn to dusk. Sound is intimate. It enters us, surrounds us, becomes part of us in a way that sight cannot. The sounds of the pyramid would have been inescapable for anyone within miles of the construction site, a constant presence, shaping the experience of work and rest alike. Tonight, let us listen. Let us reconstruct, as best we can, the auditory world of the pyramid builders. For in their sounds, their chisels and chants, their rhythms and silences, we find another dimension of this ancient achievement, another way of connecting with the people who made it possible. The day began in relative quiet. Before dawn, the construction site lay still, the great mass of the pyramid a dark silhouette against the slowly brightening sky. The workers were waking in their village, stretching, yawning, preparing for the day ahead. The sounds were domestic, the murmur of conversation, the clatter of pottery, the occasional cry of a baby or bark of a dog. But as the sun crested the horizon, the quiet began to give way. Workers streamed toward the site, their footsteps creating a soft thunder of sandals and bare feet on packed earth. Foremen called out instructions. Teams assembled, greeting each other, sorting themselves into working groups. The hum of human activity grew, swelling like a tide. And then the work began, and with it, the symphony. The most constant sound was the tap of copper on stone. Thousands of chisels striking thousands of blocks, all day, every day, for years on end. This was not a single sound, but a complex texture. Some strikes sharp and high, others dull and low. Some rapid like rain on a roof, others slow and deliberate like the ticking of a great clock. In the quarries, the sound was different. Here, the diorite pounders created a deeper, more percussive rhythm. Thud, 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 as heavy stone balls struck granite, pulverizing it grain by grain. The quarry workers often synchronized their pounding, creating a collective beat that helped them maintain their pace. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost trance-like, the kind of sound that you stop hearing after a while because it becomes the background of everything. But the most memorable sounds of pyramid construction were the human ones, the voices of the workers themselves. Moving heavy stones required coordination. A team of 20 or 30 men, all pulling on ropes attached to a sledge, had to work in perfect unison. If some pulled while others rested, the stone would not move. Or worse, it would move erratically, risking injury and damage. The solution was singing. Work songs have existed in every culture that has ever engaged in collective physical labor. Sailors have their shanties. Slaves had their spirituals. Chain gangs had their chants. These songs serve a practical purpose. They synchronize effort, ensuring that everyone pulls or lifts or strikes at exactly the same moment. The Egyptian work songs are lost to us. We have no recordings, no notation, no direct evidence of their melodies or lyrics. But we can be certain they existed because the work could not have been done without them. And we can imagine, based on work songs from other cultures and other times, what they might have sounded like. A leader would sing a line, perhaps a phrase praising the pharaoh, perhaps a complaint about the heat, perhaps a simple nonsense syllable. The crew would respond in unison, their voices blending into a single sound, their bodies moving together as they sang. Pull, sing, pull, sing. The rhythm was the work, and the work was the rhythm. The songs would have varied. Different teams might have had different songs, a source of identity and pride. Some songs might have been traditional, passed down through generations of workers. Others might have been improvised, created on the spot to address the specific circumstances of the moment. The heat of the day, the weight of a particular block, the personality of a demanding foreman. Humor would have been present. Work songs often contain jokes, complaints, mild obscenities, anything to lighten the mood and make the labor more bearable. The Egyptian workers, like workers everywhere, would have found ways to laugh at their situation, to mock their superiors, to find joy in the midst of hard work. The songs would have carried this joy, transmitting it from voice to voice, from team to team, across the vast construction site. And the songs would have created community. Singing together is a bonding experience. It synchronizes not just bodies but minds, creating a sense of shared identity and purpose. The workers who sang together felt connected to each other in a way that transcended the mere fact of working in the same place. They were a team, a unit, a family of sorts. The foremen added their own sounds to the mix. They called out instructions, encouragement, warnings. Careful at the corner. Keep the pace steady. Watch your footing on the ramp. These shouts punctuated the rhythm of the songs, adding a layer of communication above the basic beat of the work. The sounds of tools and voices were not the only sounds. There were also the sounds of materials, the scrape of sledge runners on sand, the groan of ropes under tension, the crack of stone splitting along its natural grain. There was the splash of water being poured ahead of the sledges, the thud of wooden levers being inserted beneath blocks, the rumble of stone being rolled into position. Animals contributed their sounds as well. Donkeys brayed in the supply areas, carrying loads of tools and provisions. Cattle lowed, their strength sometimes used for the heaviest hauling tasks. Dogs barked in the workers' village, and cats prowled silently through the storage areas, hunting the mice that threatened the grain supplies. And beneath all of this, always, was the wind, the desert wind, carrying sand and dust, whistling around the corners of the rising pyramid, creating its own constant whisper. The wind was never silent at Giza. It was always there, a background presence, sometimes gentle and sometimes fierce, shaping the soundscape as surely as the human activity did. The sounds changed with the time of day. Morning brought the bustle of work beginning, the assembling of teams, the first strikes of chisels, the initial songs of the pulling crews. Midday brought a lull, as the worst heat forced a reduction in activity. The sounds grew quieter, more scattered, as workers rested in whatever shade they could find. Afternoon brought renewed energy. The sun was still hot, but the worst was past. The pace picked up, the songs grew louder, the percussion of stone on stone reached its daily peak. This was the most productive time, and the sounds reflected that productivity, a great crescendo of coordinated effort. And then evening came, and with it, a gradual quieting. The work wound down. The songs faded. The last chisels fell silent. The workers gathered their tools and made their way back to the village, their footsteps and conversation creating a soft murmur that slowly dissolved into the desert silence. The silence of night was not absolute, of course. The workers' village had its own sounds, cooking fires crackling, children playing their final games before bed, adults talking softly as they wound down from the day. But compared to the roar of construction, it was silence, a profound, restful quiet that settled over the plateau like a blanket. And in that quiet, the pyramid stood alone, massive, silent, patient. The stones that had been placed during the day were now still, settling into their eternal positions. The ramps that had swarmed with activity were empty, ghostly in the starlight. The great monument absorbed the silence, became part of it, seemed to generate its own stillness. The workers, lying on their sleeping mats, would hear this silence. After a day filled with noise, the hammering and singing, the shouting and scraping, the silence was almost physical. It pressed against the ears, a presence as tangible as the sounds that had preceded it. Some workers might have found it unsettling. Others would have found it peaceful, a welcome relief from the constant stimulation of the workday. In the silence, the mind could wander. The workers might have thought about their families back home, their fields lying fallow until the flood receded, the children they would not see until their corvée service was complete. They might have thought about the pyramid itself, the strange and magnificent structure they were building, the pharaoh who would someday be buried within it. Or they might have thought about nothing at all. After a day of hard physical labor, the mind often goes blank, too tired for thought, content simply to rest. The silence becomes a void into which consciousness gratefully dissolves, slipping from wakefulness into sleep without resistance. This is the gift of physical work. It earns rest. It creates the conditions for deep, dreamless sleep. The workers who hauled stones all day would not have struggled with insomnia. They would not have lain awake, minds racing with worry and speculation. They would have closed their eyes and fallen immediately into the darkness, their exhausted bodies demanding the restoration that only sleep can provide. We, in our modern world, often lack this gift. Our work is mental rather than physical. Our bodies are not tired enough to override our racing minds. We lie awake, thinking, worrying, unable to find the switch that turns off consciousness. But tonight, perhaps, we can borrow a little of the pyramid builder's exhaustion, not the actual tiredness of physical labor. We have not hauled stones today, but the spirit of it, the understanding that work deserves rest, that effort earns peace, that the silence at the end of the day is not emptiness, but fulfillment. The sounds of the pyramid have faded now. The chisels are silent. The songs have ended. The voices have stilled. Only the wind remains, whispering across the desert, carrying the last echoes of the day's labor into the infinite night. Listen to that silence. Let it fill your ears, your mind, your body. Let it replace the sounds of your own day. The beeps and buzzes, the conversations and notifications, the endless noise of modern life. All of that is gone now. All of that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, there's only the silence of Giza, the deep, ancient silence that has surrounded the pyramids for 5,000 years. The silence that the workers knew, that they earned through their labor, that they fell into each night like falling into a soft, dark sea. You are falling into that sea now. The sounds are fading. The world is growing quiet. The great symphony of construction has played its final note, and now there is only the long, peaceful rest that follows. The workers are asleep. The foremen are asleep. The scribes have put away their records. The overseers have checked their final tallies, and the entire vast enterprise of pyramid building has surrendered to the night. Only the pyramid remains awake, if stone can be said to wake. It stands in the darkness, growing slowly toward completion, patient as only stone can be patient. It does not need sleep. It does not need rest. It simply waits, silent and eternal, for the sun to rise and the sounds to begin again. But you are not stone. You need rest. You need the silence. You need the deep, healing sleep that the pyramid builders found at the end of each exhausting day. So let the silence take you. Let the sounds of the ancient world fade into the sounds of your own breathing, slow and steady, the only rhythm left. Let the great percussion of copper and stone, the chorus of working songs, the shouts and whispers of 10,000 laborers, let all of it dissolve into the quiet darkness. The pyramid dreams in silence. The desert dreams in silence. And you, at last, can dream in silence too. Rest now. The sounds will return tomorrow, as they always do. But tonight, there is only peace. Only quiet. Only the soft, welcoming embrace of rest. Close your eyes. Listen to the silence. And let it carry you gently, gently, into sleep. We have followed the stone on its long journey, from the darkness of the quarry, where it slept for millions of years, down the Nile on wooden barges, floating like a dream through the Egyptian landscape, across the wet sand on sledges, pulled by teams of singing workers, up the ramps, climbing slowly toward the sky. Now, at last, the stone arrives at its final destination, the place where it will rest for eternity, the precise spot in the growing pyramid where it belongs, and where it will remain long after everyone who placed it has turned to dust. This is the moment of truth. All the quarrying and transporting, all the planning and organizing, all the effort of thousands of workers, it all comes down to this. The stone must be placed, and it must be placed perfectly. Tonight, let us watch this most delicate of operations. Let us see how blocks weighing tons were maneuvered with precision measured in millimeters. Let us understand the patience and skill required to set stone upon stone, course upon course, until a mountain rose from the desert floor. For in this slow rise, this patient accumulation of weight and height, we find perhaps the deepest lesson of the pyramids, that greatness is built not in leaps, but in increments, not through speed, but through steadiness, one stone at a time. The sledge arrives at the working level of the pyramid. The block it carries has traveled perhaps hundreds of meters, from quarry to transport route to ramp to here. But the final meters are often the most difficult. The block must leave the sledge and take its place in the growing structure. It must be moved not just horizontally but positioned exactly, aligned with its neighbors, leveled and squared and made perfect. The workers gather around. They have done this thousands of times, but they approach each block, with fresh attention. Every stone is different, slightly heavier or lighter, slightly wider or narrower, with its own peculiarities of shape and balance. The workers read each block like a text, understanding its character before they attempt to move it. First, the block must be lifted from the sledge. This is accomplished with levers, long wooden beams, thick and strong, inserted beneath the stone at carefully chosen points. A team of workers presses down on the lever ends, and the stone rises, just slightly, just enough to slip wooden rollers or small stone wedges beneath it. The process is repeated on the other side. Press, lift, insert. Press, lift, insert. Gradually, the block rises higher, supported now by a small platform of rollers and wedges. The sledge is pulled away, and the block rests on its temporary supports, ready to be moved into position. Now comes the horizontal movement. The block must travel from where the sledge deposited it to its final position in the pyramid structure. This distance might be only a few meters, but those meters require exquisite care. The workers use a technique called walking the stone. They insert levers on alternating sides and pivot the block, first one corner, then the other, in a slow rotation that moves it gradually sideways. It is like walking a heavy piece of furniture across a room. Shift the left side forward, then the right side, then the left again. Slow, patient, controlled. Other workers pull on ropes attached to the block, providing additional guidance and force. The foreman watches constantly, calling out adjustments. A little more on the right. Stop. Now the left. Good. Easy, easy. The block creeps forward, centimeter by centimeter. The workers are in no hurry. Speed leads to mistakes, and mistakes with multi-ton blocks can be fatal. One man with a crushed foot, one stone cracked by careless handling. These are the consequences of impatience. Better to take an extra hour and do the job right. As the block approaches its final position, the checking begins. A foreman produces his tools, a cubit rod for measuring, a plumb bob for checking vertical alignment, a straight edge for verifying that surfaces are flat and true. He measures the gap between the new block and its neighbors. Is it consistent? Is it narrow enough? The blocks must fit tightly together, with minimal space between them. Any gap is a weakness, a place where water might seep in and freeze, expanding and cracking the stone. The Egyptians understood this, even if they never experienced freezing temperatures. They built as if the pyramid would face every possible threat, for all of time. The plumb bob swings at the end of its string, settling into stillness. The foreman sights along it, checking that the face of the block is perfectly vertical. Even a slight lean, repeated over hundreds of courses, would create a pyramid that tilted visibly. Every block must be true. The straight edge is laid across the surface, checking for high spots or depressions. The top of each block must be level, so that the next course will rest evenly upon it. Any variation must be corrected, either by adjusting the block's position or by grinding down the high spots with rubbing stones. If the block is not quite right, and often, it is not quite right on the first attempt, adjustments must be made. The levers come out again. Workers pry and push, moving the block of fingers width to the left, a hair's breadth forward. The measurements are taken again. Still not perfect. More adjustments. The process continues until the foreman is satisfied. This might take minutes, or it might take hours. A particularly troublesome block, with an awkward shape or an inconvenient position, might require an entire afternoon to place properly. The workers do not complain. They understand that the pyramid's perfection depends on getting every single block exactly right. There are no unimportant stones. When the block is finally in position, when all the measurements have been checked and approved, there is a moment of quiet satisfaction. Another stone placed. Another small step toward completion. The workers step back, survey their work, and allow themselves a brief rest before moving on to the next block. And there is always a next block. The pyramid requires millions of them. Each one must be quarried, transported, lifted, positioned, checked, and approved. Each one must pass through the same careful process. The work is repetitive, yes, but it is not monotonous. Each block presents its own challenges, requires its own solutions, offers its own small satisfactions. The courses rise, one atop another. The base course is the largest, containing the biggest blocks, covering the greatest area. Each subsequent course is slightly smaller, step back from the one below, creating the pyramid's characteristic shape. The higher the workers go, the fewer blocks are needed, but the harder those blocks are to reach. The casing stones were different from the core blocks in almost every way. The core blocks were rough-cut, adequate for their purpose, but not beautiful. They came from local quarries, extracted quickly and placed efficiently, hidden forever inside the pyramid's mass where no one would see them. But the casing stones were works of art. They came from Tura, a quarry on the eastern bank of the Nile, across the river from Giza. The limestone at Tura was special, fine-grained, dense, almost pure white. When polished, it achieved a luminous quality that ordinary limestone could never match. The Egyptians called it fine white limestone, and they reserved it for the most sacred purposes. The journey from Tura to Giza was not long, just a few miles across the river, but the handling was infinitely more careful than for ordinary blocks. These stones could not be roughly cut or carelessly transported. Every scratch, every chip, every imperfection would be visible on the finished surface. The casing stones were treated like the precious objects they were. At the quarry, the finest stonecutters worked to extract blocks of exceptional quality. They selected areas of the limestone bed that were free of fossils and flaws, that showed the purest white color, that would take a polish without revealing hidden defects. The extraction was slow and painstaking, with none of the mass production that characterized the core block quarries.
The casing stones were different from the core blocks in almost every way. The core blocks were rough-cut, adequate for their purpose, but not beautiful. They came from local quarries, extracted quickly and placed efficiently, hidden forever inside the pyramid's mass, where no one would see them. But the casing stones were works of art. They came from Tura, a quarry on the eastern bank of the Nile, across the river from Giza. The limestone at Tura was special, fine-grained, dense, almost pure white. When polished, it achieved a luminous quality that ordinary limestone could never match. The Egyptians called it fine white limestone, and they reserved it for the most sacred purposes. The journey from Tura to Giza was not long, just a few miles across the river, but the handling was infinitely more careful than for ordinary blocks. These stones could not be roughly cut or carelessly transported. Every scratch, every chip, every imperfection would be visible on the finished surface. The casing stones were treated like the precious objects they were. At the quarry, the finest stonecutters worked to extract blocks of exceptional quality. They selected areas of the limestone bed that were free of fossils and flaws, that showed the purest white color, that would take a polish without revealing hidden defects. The extraction was slow and painstaking, with none of the mass production that characterized the core block quarries.
Each casing stone was cut to precise specifications. Unlike the core blocks, which were roughly rectangular and fitted together with some tolerance for variation, the casing stones had to match perfectly. Their interfaces were cut at precise angles to fit against the stepped core of the pyramid. Their outer faces were cut at the exact slope required by the pyramid's design, the seat we discussed earlier, maintained with absolute consistency from base to apex. The stones were rough-shaped at the quarry, then transported across the Nile by boat and sledged to the pyramid. But the final shaping and polishing was done on site after the stones were in place. This might seem backward. Why not finish the stones before installing them? But it was actually the only practical approach. You see, the casing stones had to form a continuous surface. Each stone had to align perfectly with its neighbors, with no visible seams or steps. This level of precision could not be achieved by cutting stones individually and hoping they would fit together. It could only be achieved by cutting them together as a unified surface after they were already in position. And so the casing work proceeded from the top down. This is another surprise for those who imagine construction as a simple bottom-to-top process. The core blocks were indeed placed from bottom to top, each course providing a platform for the next. But the casing stones were finished in the opposite direction, starting at the apex and working down toward the base. The reason for this top-down approach was practical. As the casing stones were polished, the ramps and scaffolding used during construction had to be removed. If the polishing proceeded from bottom to top, The workers would have no way to reach the upper levels. They would be trapped above the smooth, unclimbable surface they had just created. By working from top to bottom, the workers always had access to the unfinished surfaces below. They could use the rough stones as footholds and anchor points, gradually retreating down the pyramid's face as the polished surface advanced behind them. It was like painting yourself out of a room, but in reverse, on a monumental scale. The polishing itself was laborious work. The workers used rubbing stones, flat pieces of sandstone or quartzite, combined with fine sand and water. They would rub the surface of the limestone in long, steady strokes, gradually wearing away the rough outer layer to reveal the smooth, lustrous stone beneath. Hour after hour, day after day, the rubbing continued. The workers' arms grew tired, their hands calloused, their eyes strained from staring at the bright white surface in the Egyptian sun. But slowly, steadily, the transformation occurred. Rough stone became smooth. Maat became glossy. The pyramid began to shine. The joints between stones received special attention. The goal was to make them invisible, to create the illusion of a single continuous surface rather than thousands of individual blocks. The craftsman would rub and sand and polish the joint areas until the seams virtually disappeared, leaving only hairline cracks that were almost impossible to see from a distance. The finished surface was remarkable. Ancient visitors described it with awe. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting the pyramids 2,000 years after they were built, marveled at the polished stones, noting that the joints were so fine they could barely be seen. The casing created a surface so smooth that, according to some accounts, a person could not climb it. There were no handholds, no footholds, no rough spots to grip, and the brightness was extraordinary. The white limestone reflected the Egyptian sun with almost painful intensity. The pyramid would have been visible for miles, a beacon in the desert, impossible to ignore. At certain times of day, when the sun struck at just the right angle, the reflection would have been almost blinding. A man-made mountain that seemed to generate its own light. The Egyptians had a word for this radiant quality. They called it Ake, which meant something like horizon or place of glory. The pyramid was an Ake in stone, a physical representation of the place where the sun rose and set, where the earthly world met the celestial realm, where the pharaoh spirit would ascend to join the gods. The symbolism was intentional. The smooth, sloping surface evoked the rays of the sun, streaming down from heaven to earth. The brilliant white color represented purity, divinity, the eternal light of Ra. The perfect geometric form embodied Maat, the cosmic order that held the universe together. The pyramid was not just a tomb. It was a statement about the nature of reality, encoded in stone and light. It proclaimed the pharaoh's divine status, his connection to the sun god, his mastery over the forces of chaos and darkness. Every gleaming surface was a prayer, every reflected ray an affirmation of eternal truth. Today, almost all of the casing stones are gone. They were stripped away over the centuries, recycled into other buildings, carried off by earthquakes, weathered by time. Only a few remain at the base of the Great Pyramid, and a larger section survives near the top of Khufu's pyramid, enough to give us a glimpse of what once was, but not enough to recreate the full effect. The loss is immeasurable. What we see today at Giza is a skeleton, a shadow, a rough draft of the original vision. The pyramids are still impressive, of course. Their sheer size ensures that, but they lack the luminous perfection that the builders intended. We see the bones, but not the skin, the structure, but not the surface, the mountain, but not the light. Try to imagine what has been lost. Imagine the Great Pyramid as it looked on the day of its completion. Every surface polished, every joint invisible, the entire mass gleaming like a crystal against the blue Egyptian sky. Imagine walking toward it across the desert, watching it grow larger and larger, brighter and brighter, until you stood at its base, craning your neck to see the apex, squinting against the reflected glare. This is what the ancient Egyptians saw. This is what they created, through years of patient labor, through the efforts of countless craftsmen polishing countless stones. They built not just a monument, but a miracle, a mountain transformed into light, a tomb that blazed like a second sun. The work took years. The casing of the Great Pyramid comprised perhaps 144,000 individual stones. each one cut and transported and positioned and polished, even working as efficiently as possible. The finishing process must have extended long after the core was complete. Years of rubbing and smoothing, transforming rough limestone into a surface like glass. And then, one day, it was done. Imagine that moment. The last rubbing stone set aside. The last patch of rough surface polished smooth. The scaffolding removed. The ramps dismantled. The construction debris cleared away. And there it stood, perfect, complete, radiant, the greatest monument the world had ever seen. What did the workers feel, looking upon their finished creation? Pride, surely. Satisfaction. Perhaps a touch of disbelief that they had actually done it, that this impossible thing had been accomplished through their own hands. They had built a mountain. They had clothed it in light. They had created something that would endure. They believed, forever. And in a sense, it has endured. The casing is gone, stripped away by the careless centuries, but the pyramid remains. The core blocks that we see today are the skeleton that the beautiful surface once covered. The beauty is lost, but the bones remain, and in them we can still read the story of what once was. Perhaps it is fitting that we see the pyramid in its stripped-down state. The surface beauty was always temporary, even if temporary meant thousands of years. But the underlying structure, the massive accumulation of stone, the patient work of countless hands, that is eternal, or as close to eternal as human works can be. The light has faded, the gleam has dulled, but the mountain remains. As you lie there tonight, imagine the pyramid in its glory. Imagine the white fire of the casing stones, blazing in your mind's eye. Imagine the ancient Egyptians standing before their completed work, seeing the sunlight transformed into something holy. We have walked around the pyramid, watching it rise from the outside. We have seen the core blocks placed, the casing stones polished. The mountain of light takes shape against the desert sky. But there is another pyramid we have not yet explored, the pyramid within. For the Great Pyramid is not solid. Deep inside its massive bulk-like chambers and passages, hidden spaces carved from stone, wrapped in darkness so complete that no ray of sunlight has touched them for nearly 5,000 years. Tonight, let us go inside. Let us leave the blazing Egyptian sun behind and descend into the cool darkness of the pyramid's heart. Let us walk the narrow passages, crouch through the low corridors, and emerge at last into the great chambers where the pharaoh was meant to rest for all eternity. These spaces were never meant to be seen. They were sealed after the pharaoh's burial, hidden from the world, protected by tons of stone from anyone who might try to disturb the king's eternal sleep. And yet, somehow we know they exist. Somehow, across the millennia, the secrets have been revealed. Come with me now into the darkness. There are wonders waiting there. The entrance to the Great Pyramid lies on its north face, about 17 meters above ground level. In ancient times, this entrance was hidden, sealed with casing stones indistinguishable from those around it. Only those who knew the secret could find the way in. Today, most visitors enter through a different passage, a tunnel cut by Arab workmen in the 9th century CE, searching for treasure. But let us imagine using the original entrance, the way the pyramid's builders intended. We step through the opening and immediately begin to descend. The passage slopes downward at a steep angle, about 26 degrees, forcing us to crouch and brace ourselves against the smooth walls. The ceiling is low, barely high enough to pass without scraping our heads. The floor is slippery, worn smooth by the feet of everyone who has passed this way before us. The light from the entrance fades quickly. Within a few meters, we are in near total darkness. The air is cool and still, untouched by the desert heat outside. There is a smell, not unpleasant, but distinctive, the smell of ancient stone, of dust undisturbed for centuries, of time itself compressed into a tangible presence. We descend for over 100 meters, deeper and deeper into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. The passage seems endless, a tunnel into the earth with no visible destination. Our torches, or in imagination, our modern flashlights, cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating the illusion of movement where nothing moves. At last, the descending passage levels out. We find ourselves in the subterranean chamber, a rough, unfinished room carved from the living rock beneath the pyramid's foundation. The ceiling is low, the floor uneven, the walls showing the marks of ancient tools. This chamber was abandoned, for reasons we do not fully understand. Perhaps the plans changed. Perhaps a flaw was discovered in the rock. Whatever the reason, the workers stopped here, leaving the chamber incomplete. But this is not where the pharaoh was buried. For that, we must go back up. We retrace our steps, climbing the steep ascending passage, and at a certain point, we find another corridor branching upward. This is the ascending passage, blocked in ancient times by massive granite plugs, meant to seal the upper chambers forever. Somehow, tomb robbers found a way around these plugs, chiseling through the softer limestone beside them. We follow their path, squeezing through the narrow gap they created, and continue our ascent. The passage climbs for about 39 meters, then suddenly opens into something extraordinary. The Grand Gallery. Nothing prepares you for the Grand Gallery. After the cramped passages, the low ceilings, the claustrophobic darkness, suddenly you are standing in a space of soaring grandeur. The ceiling rises nearly 9 meters above your head, stepping inward in 7 corbelled courses of perfectly fitted limestone. The walls are polished smooth, reflecting your torchlight in soft gleams. The floor is a narrow walkway, flanked by raised benches of stone, climbing steeply toward the heart of the pyramid. This is the most magnificent architectural space inside the Great Pyramid. It serves no obvious practical purpose. It is far larger than needed for any functional corridor, and yet it exists, a hidden cathedral of stone, seen by no one after the pharaoh's burial until tomb robbers broke through thousands of years later. Why did the builders create this space? What purpose did it serve? We do not know for certain. Some scholars believe the Grand Gallery was designed to hold the granite blocks used to seal the passages after the burial. The plugs would have been stored here, then slid down into position once the pharaoh was entombed. Others suggest it had ritual significance, perhaps representing the pharaoh's ascent to the heavens, the steep slope symbolizing the climb from earthly to divine. Whatever its purpose, the Grand Gallery is a masterpiece of engineering. The corbelled ceiling distributes the enormous weight of the stones above, channeling the pressure outward into the pyramid's mass rather than letting it crush the chamber below. The precision of the stonework is extraordinary. The joints between blocks are almost invisible, the surfaces as smooth as glass. We climb the gallery, our footsteps echoing in the silence. At the top, we pass through a low passage and a small antechamber, ducking under massive granite portcullises, stone slabs that could be lowered to seal the chamber beyond. The portcullises are raised now, their blocking function long since defeated by ancient robbers. And then we enter the king's chamber. The king's chamber is the heart of the pyramid. This is where Khufu's mummified body was meant to rest for eternity, protected by millions of tons of stone, hidden from the world, prepared for the journey to the afterlife. The chamber is relatively small, about 10 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 6 meters high, but its construction is extraordinary. Every surface is made of red granite, transported from Aswan 600 miles to the south. The blocks are enormous, weighing up to 80 tons each. They fit together with such precision that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. Above the ceiling, unseen from below, are 5 relieving chambers, spaces designed to distribute the weight of the pyramid above and prevent the king's chamber from being crushed. The roof of each relieving chamber consists of massive granite beams, placed to absorb the immense pressure. The uppermost chamber has a pointed roof, like an inverted V, to deflect the weight outward. This is engineering of the highest order. The builders understood the forces at work within their monument and designed systems to counteract them. They had no calculus, no stress analysis software, no computer modeling. They had only observation, experience, and the accumulated wisdom of generations. And yet they solved problems that would challenge modern engineers. In the western end of the chamber sits the sarcophagus. It is made of a single block of red granite, hollowed out to receive the pharaoh's coffin and mummy. The sarcophagus is empty now. The body and all its treasures were stolen long ago, probably within a few centuries of the burial. Only the stone container remains, too heavy to move, too valuable to the robbers as anything but an obstacle. The sarcophagus is slightly larger than the ascending passage through which we entered. This means it could not have been brought into the chamber after the pyramid was built. It must have been placed here during construction, before the upper courses were laid, before the passages were completed. The entire pyramid was built around this single stone box. 2 narrow shafts extend from the king's chamber, one from the north wall, one from the south. For years, scholars debated their purpose. Were they ventilation shafts, allowing fresh air to circulate in the chamber? Were they escape routes for the workers who sealed the tomb? Recent research suggests they were neither. They were star shafts, aligned with specific stars important in Egyptian religion, providing channels through which the pharaoh's spirit could ascend to the heavens. The northern shaft points toward the circumpolar stars, the imperishable ones that never set, where the pharaoh would dwell in eternity. The southern shaft points toward Orion, associated with Osiris, the god of the dead. The shafts are too narrow for a person to pass through, but they were wide enough for a spirit, for the Ba and Ka of the departed king, making their way from the earthly tomb to the celestial realm.
And then, one day, it was finished. There was no thunderclap, no divine proclamation, no miraculous sign in the heavens. There was simply a moment, quiet, almost ordinary, when the last stone was placed, the last surface polished, the last measurement taken and approved. The Great Pyramid was complete. 20 years of labor, millions of stones, countless hands, countless hours, countless small efforts accumulated into something vast and eternal. And now it was done. Tonight, let's be present at that moment. Let us stand among the workers as they realize that their great project has reached its end. Let us feel what they felt, the pride and the relief, the satisfaction and the strange emptiness that comes when a consuming purpose is suddenly fulfilled. For completion is not only triumph, it is also loss, the end of something that has given meaning to your days, structure to your years, identity to yourself. The workers who finished the pyramid faced not just celebration but transition, not just achievement but change. Let us walk with them through that change, as the construction site falls silent and the great workforce disperses, as the pyramid passes from project to monument, from work in progress to eternal fact. The placement of a capstone would have been a ceremony of great significance. Only a small team could work at the apex. There was simply no room for more, but thousands would have gathered below to witness the moment. The finest craftsmen, the most trusted workers, would have been chosen for the honor of placing the final piece. We can imagine the silence as the capstone was maneuvered into position. The entire construction site holding its breath, every eye turned upward, every heart beating with anticipation. And then the stone settling into place, the final adjustment made, the signal given that it was done. What sound would have followed? Cheering, perhaps. The release of tension held for 20 years, erupting in shouts of triumph and joy. Or perhaps something quieter, a collective exhalation, a murmur of satisfaction, the soft sound of thousands of people realizing together that they had accomplished the impossible. The pharaoh would have been present, or his representatives if he himself had grown too old or ill to attend. Priests would have offered prayers and sacrifices, thanking the gods for their favor, dedicating the completed monument to its eternal purpose. The ceremony would have been elaborate, full of ritual significance, marking the transition from construction to consecration. But beneath all the ceremony, there would have been simpler emotions. The foreman who had supervised his team for 15 years, watching his final stones incorporated into the whole. The scribe who had tracked every ration, every worker, every block, finally closing his last scroll. The veteran craftsman who had polished casing stones until his arms ached, seeing the entire surface gleam as one continuous sheet of light. For many workers, the completion brought immediate practical concerns. The great project that had employed them for years was ending. What would they do now? Where would they go? The seasonal workers, the farmers who had come during the flood, would return to their villages, as they had always done. But this time they would not come back. The pyramid no longer needed them. Their corvée service was complete, their obligation fulfilled. They would resume their agricultural lives, perhaps telling stories of their years at Giza, perhaps showing scars from old injuries, but fundamentally unchanged. The permanent workers faced a more complex transition. The craftsmen, the overseers, the scribes, these people had built their lives around the pyramid project. They had lived at Giza for decades, raised families in the workers' village, defined themselves by their roles in the great construction. Now those roles were ending. Some would find new employment immediately. The pharaoh had other projects: temples, causeways, smaller tombs for nobles and officials. Skilled workers were always in demand, and those who had proven themselves on the pyramid would be sought after for other royal works. The best craftsmen would simply move to new sites, begin new projects, continue their careers. Others would retire. 20 years of hard labor takes a toll on the body. Men who had been young and strong at the beginning were now middle-aged, worn down by the endless effort. Some had accumulated enough wealth, in the form of rations saved, favors earned, positions achieved, to support themselves without further work. They could rest at last. The workers' village itself would have changed rapidly. The bustling community that had supported thousands of workers began to empty. Families packed their belongings, said their farewells, and departed for homes they had not seen in years. The bakeries that had produced hundreds of loaves daily fell quiet. The breweries stopped their constant production. The streets that had hummed with life grew silent. Within months, perhaps weeks, the village that had served the pyramid construction would be largely abandoned. Some structures remained in use. The pyramid required ongoing maintenance, and priests would need housing to perform the rituals of the mortuary cult. But the great majority of the population dispersed, scattered back to the villages and towns from which they had originally come. It must have been strange for those who remained, walking through streets that had once been crowded, passing houses that had once been full of life. The silence would have been profound, not the peaceful silence of completion, but the empty silence of departure, of endings, of things that would never be the same. The pyramid itself entered a new phase of existence. No longer a work in progress, it was now a finished monument, a sealed tomb, a place of ritual and reverence. The construction ramps were dismantled, their materials hauled away or incorporated into other structures. The debris of 20 years of building was cleared. The site was cleaned and prepared for its eternal function. And then the pharaoh died. The quiet completion was complete. What remained? A mountain of stone, shining in the desert sun. A tomb sealed and secret. A pharaoh resting in darkness. And, scattered across Egypt, thousands of people who had once been pyramid builders now returned to other lives. These former workers carried the pyramid with them, in a sense. They carried memories of the years they had spent at Giza, the friends they had made, the skills they had learned. They carried the pride of having contributed to something extraordinary, something that would outlast them by millennia. Some of them probably returned to visit in later years, coming back to Giza to see the completed monument, to remember the days when they had climbed its ramps and placed its stones. Standing at its base, looking up at the gleaming white surface, thinking about all the effort it had required, all the lives it had touched. The pyramid would have seemed different to them now. No longer a workplace, but a monument. No longer a project, but a memory. The rough scaffolding replaced by polished perfection. The noise and activity replaced by silence and awe. Perhaps they felt proud. Perhaps they felt nostalgic. Perhaps they felt a kind of grief for the life they had lived at Giza, for the friends they had lost, for the years that were gone and would never return. Completion brings all of these emotions, tangled together, impossible to separate. And perhaps, standing before the pyramid in their later years, they felt something else. A sense of connection to eternity. A realization that their work would outlast everything. Their bodies, their families, their villages, their entire civilization. The pyramid would still be standing when all of them were dust, when their great-great-grandchildren were dust, when Egypt itself had changed beyond recognition. This is the gift of meaningful work. It connects us to something larger than ourselves, something that extends beyond our brief lives into the long future. The pyramid builders did not work for wages alone, or even for duty alone. They worked for immortality, not their own, perhaps, but the immortality of their creation, the eternal persistence of the thing they had helped to build. And they achieved it. 5,000 years later, the pyramid still stands. Their work is still visible, still impressive, still inspiring wonder in everyone who sees it. The hands that placed those stones are long gone, but the stones remain. The voices that sang the work songs are silent, but the monument speaks for them. This is the quiet completion that awaits us all. Not the dramatic finale we might imagine, but a simple ending, a last stone placed, a final task completed, a laying down of tools. And then the transition to whatever comes next, whether that is new work or rest, new challenges or peace. The pyramid teaches us how to approach this completion, with pride in what we have done, with acceptance of what we must leave behind, with faith that our contributions will endure, in some form, even after we are gone. As you lie there tonight, consider your own quiet completions. The projects you have finished, the phases of life you have concluded, the chapters you have closed. Each one was a kind of ending, a kind of death. And each one led to something new, something different, something that could not have existed without the ending that preceded it. We do not know exactly when Khufu died, or exactly when the pyramid was completed. The timing may have been close. The pyramid finished just in time to receive its intended occupant. Or there may have been years between completion and burial, years during which the pyramid stood empty, waiting for its purpose to be fulfilled. Either way, the burial would have been the true completion of the project. The pharaoh's mummified body, enclosed in its nested coffins, was carried into the pyramid through the passages we explored earlier. It was laid in the granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber. The grave goods were arranged around it, food and drink for the afterlife, furniture and clothing, all the necessities for eternal existence. And then the tomb was sealed. The granite plugs were slid down from the grand gallery, blocking the ascending passage. The entrance was covered, disguised to look like the surrounding casing stones. The pyramid closed like an eye, shutting out the world, protecting its precious contents from all who might disturb them. The workers who performed this final sealing would have been few in number, a trusted team, probably sworn to secrecy, possibly killed afterward to protect the tomb's location. We do not know their fate. We only know that they succeeded in sealing the pyramid, that the entrance remained hidden for centuries, that the pharaoh was left alone in his darkness. And then silence. The pyramid stood. Days passed, then months, then years, then centuries. The mortuary cult performed its rituals, offering food and prayers to the dead king. But the construction crews were gone. The bustle of building was replaced by the stillness of eternity. And so we come to the end of our journey together. We have traveled far tonight, you and I. We have walked beside the ancient Nile, felt its waters rise and fall. We have descended into quarries and climbed construction ramps. We have watched copper chisels tap against limestone and dolerite pounders strike granite. We have eaten bread and drunk beer with the workers, rested in their village, listened to their songs. We have seen the pyramid rise, stone by stone, year by year, generation by generation. We have witnessed its completion, its sealing, its passage from work to monument. We have stood in the hidden chambers and gazed up at the gleaming casing stones. Now, the work is done. The workers have gone home. The pharaoh rests in his granite chamber. The passages are sealed, the entrance hidden, the tomb closed against the world. And the pyramid begins its long sleep. This is where our story ends, but where another story begins, the story of eternity. The pyramid was built to last forever, and tonight, in these final quiet moments, let us imagine what forever looks like. Let us watch the centuries pass like clouds across the sky. Let us see the pyramid endure while everything around it changes, fades, disappears. And let us, in watching, find our own rest. For the pyramid's sleep is deep and peaceful, and perhaps some of that peace can be ours as well. The first years pass quietly. The mortuary cult continues its work, priests making daily offerings at the temple beside the pyramid. They bring bread and beer, meat and fruit, everything the pharaoh might need in the afterlife. They recite prayers, perform rituals, maintain the sacred connection between the living and the dead. The pyramid stands unchanged, gleaming white against the blue desert sky. The casing stones reflect the sun by day and the stars by night. The hidden chambers remain undisturbed, the pharaoh's rest unbroken. But outside the pyramid, the world continues. The The pharaoh's son takes the throne, then his grandson, then rulers whose names we have forgotten. The kingdom prospers and struggles, expands and contracts. Wars are fought, treaties signed, alliances made and broken. The pyramid notices none of this. It simply stands patient and eternal, while the human drama unfolds around it. Decades pass. The workers who built the pyramid grow old and die. Their children grow old and die. Their grandchildren grow old and die. Within a century, no one remains who remembers the construction, who can point to a specific stone and say, "I placed that one." The living memory fades, replaced by stories, legends, gradually distorted by time. But the pyramid remains, unchanged, unchanging. Centuries pass. The mortuary cult eventually fails. The resources dry up, the priests disperse, the rituals cease. The temples beside the pyramid fall into disrepair. Sand drifts against their walls, filling their courtyards, covering their inscriptions. But the pyramid stands. The old kingdom ends. Egypt fragments, reunifies, fragments again. The Middle Kingdom rises and falls. The new kingdom brings new pharaohs, new monuments, new priorities. The pyramids of Giza are already ancient, relics of a distant past that even the Egyptians regard with wonder. Tomb robbers come. Somehow, they find their way into the sealed passages, break through the granite plugs, reach the king's chamber. They take everything: the mummy, the treasures, the grave goods that were meant to sustain the pharaoh for eternity. They leave only the empty sarcophagus, too heavy to move, too worthless to destroy. The pyramid's purpose is violated. The eternal sleep is disturbed. The body that the monument was built to protect is gone, scattered, lost forever. And yet the pyramid stands. The violation does not destroy it. The theft does not diminish it. The pyramid was built to last, and it lasts even when everything it was meant to protect has been taken away. Millennia pass. Egypt is conquered by Persians, by Greeks, by Romans. The pharaohs are gone, replaced by foreign rulers who speak foreign tongues. The old religion fades, replaced by new beliefs. The hieroglyphs become unreadable, their meaning lost for nearly 2,000 years. The pyramid stands. Visitors come from distant lands. Greek historians marvel at the monument, recording legends about its construction. Roman tourists carve their names into the ancient stones. The pyramid becomes a wonder of the world, famous throughout the Mediterranean, a symbol of human achievement that transcends the culture that created it. Earthquakes shake Egypt. The ground trembles, buildings fall, the landscape shifts. The casing stones begin to loosen, cracked by the seismic forces. One by one, over centuries, they fall away or are carried off by builders seeking ready-made materials for new constructions. The gleaming white surface disappears. The smooth, perfect form gives way to the stepped, rough appearance we know today. The mountain made of light becomes a mountain made of shadow, its glory diminished, but its presence undiminished. And still the pyramid stands. More centuries pass. Islam comes to Egypt, bringing new rulers, new architecture, new ways of understanding the world. The pyramids are seen with new eyes, monuments of the ancient past, wonders to be admired but also quarried, their stones providing material for mosques and palaces throughout Cairo. The casing stones that remain are stripped away, carried into the growing city, incorporated into buildings that will themselves eventually crumble. The pyramid loses its skin but keeps its bones. The structure endures even as the surface is lost. And now we arrive at the present moment, 5,000 years after the first stone was placed. The pyramid still stands, weathered, stripped of its glory, surrounded by a world the builders could never have imagined. Cars and buses bring tourists from every nation on Earth. Cameras capture images that would have seemed like magic to the ancient workers. Archaeologists study every stone, every passage, every scrap of evidence, trying to understand how this impossible thing was built. The pyramid has survived everything: tomb robbers and earthquakes, conquests and revolutions, the rise and fall of countless civilizations. It has outlasted every person who ever lived during its construction, every dynasty that ever ruled Egypt, every empire that ever claimed the land around it. It has become something more than a tomb, more than a monument. It has become a symbol of human ambition, of human achievement, of the human desire to create something that will endure beyond our brief lives. And it is still here, tonight, as you lie in your bed, imagining its form in the darkness. The pyramid sleeps, as it has slept for millennia. Not the sleep of the dead, but the sleep of the eternal, patient, enduring, beyond the reach of time. The night grows deeper now. The stars will overhead, the same stars that the pyramid builders watched, the same stars that have looked down on the pyramid for 50 centuries. The pyramid sleeps beneath those stars, as it has always slept, as it will always sleep. And you sleep now too. Let your body sink into the mattress, heavy and relaxed. Let your breath slow to the rhythm of eternity, in and out, rise and fall, like the flooding of the Nile, like the placing of stones, like the patient pulse of time itself. The pyramid holds you in its ancient peace. The workers welcome you into their long rest. The desert is quiet, the night is soft, and the great monument stands guard over your dreams. You have journeyed far tonight. You have learned of copper and stone, of ramps and sledges, of bread and beer, and the simple tools that built a wonder of the world. You have met workers and foremen, scribes and overseers. You have walked the passages of the hidden chambers and stood in the presence of eternity. Now the journey is complete. The story is told. The night opens before you, welcoming and endless. Sleep, traveler. Sleep, builder. Sleep, keeper of ancient memories. The pyramid watches over you, as it has watched over Egypt for 5,000 years. Its stones are your stones now, placed in your mind, part of your own inner monument. Its peace is your peace, flowing into you with every breath, settling you deeper and deeper into rest. The workers are sleeping. The pharaoh is sleeping. The desert is sleeping. The entire ancient world is wrapped in silence and darkness, waiting for a dawn that will never quite come. And you are sleeping too, joining that eternal rest, adding your dreams to the dreams of all who came before. The pyramid built by human hands. The pyramid that touched eternity. The pyramid that sleeps now and will sleep forever, under the patient stars. Drift now. Let go. The night is gentle. The story is over, but the pyramid remains. And you remain too, held in the soft darkness, at peace, at rest, at the end of the journey and the beginning of dreams. Good night, traveler.